Hello everyone. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. Story 1. On November 28, 2020, a weekend like any other in Sunny Hills, but a woman named Wu was living in a state of anxiety. Recently, her close friend, Ms. Zhang, also known as Elizabeth Zhang, often confided in her about the difficulties in life. The company's business was losing money to the point of declaring bankruptcy, causing her spirit to decline significantly. Today, the two had arranged to meet, but it was past the time, and she still could not contact her friend. Her repeated calls only received an alarming silence, which had never happened before. Concerned for her friend's well-being, Mrs. Wu drove to Ms. Zhang's mansion in Sunny Hills. After repeatedly ringing the doorbell with no response, she used her spare key to enter. In the eerie silence of the house, Mrs. Wu searched every corner, hoping to find her friend. Upon entering the bedroom, she discovered bloodstains and noticed that the surveillance system had been disabled. Her worry now turned to genuine fear, prompting her to immediately contact the police. As soon as the police received the report, they quickly arrived at the scene and began investigating. The first notable thing they discovered was that the entire security camera system in the house had been intentionally sabotaged. In this situation, the investigators could only reassure Ms. Wu that it was possible that her friend had driven himself to a hospital and that they would conduct a search of all medical facilities in the area. However, Ms. Wu could not believe this explanation in her heart. She knew her friend's personality very well, and no matter what happened, Ms. Zhang would never stay silent when she called her like this. The next evening, on a quiet street not far from the mansion, a resident noticed a Range Rover SUV that had been parked outside his house all day. What caught his attention were bloodstains beside the vehicle. He promptly alerted the police. Officers arrived, collected blood samples as evidence, and initially left. 2 hours later, a night shift officer decided to break the car's window to investigate. Inside the messy vehicle, they found a suitcase in the trunk, covered with blankets and down pillows. Upon opening it, they were hit by a horrific smell and made a gruesome discovery: the body of a woman. The victim had been stabbed over 20 times in the head, neck, and back. There was a 7-inch wound across her neck that had nearly severed her head from her body. In a short time, investigators identified the unfortunate victim, Ms. Zhang, the woman who had been reported missing the day before. News of the case quickly spread, causing a deep shock in the Chinese community in Auckland. No one could believe that such a murder had happened in Sunny Hills, a villa area known as the most secure place in the city. Through preliminary investigation, the police determined that this was not a simple case, but was full of revenge. It is noteworthy that the perpetrator seemed to be someone familiar with the victim, because the perpetrator was able to enter and exit the villa naturally without attracting any attention. The perpetrator's method was also extremely bold when he dared to use the victim's own car to dispose of the body, a move calculated to prolong the time and make it difficult for the investigation process. In addition, according to Ms. Wu, all of Ms. Zhang's electronic devices, including her phone, laptop, and computer, disappeared without a trace after the incident. This further strengthens the theory that the perpetrator had meticulously planned his cruel act. Ms. Zhang was born in 1965 in China. From a young age, she stood out for her extraordinary intelligence and agility, becoming the pride of her entire family. With ambitions to reach out to the world, she devoted herself to improving her English as a student, as if she had foreseen her future path in distant horizons. After graduating from university, she began her career at the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. It was here that fate brought her not only professional success, but also a special relationship. During a business meeting, she met Mr. Fu, who would later become her husband. The young woman's intellectual beauty and grace captivated Mr. Fu from their first encounter. Their relationship progressed quickly, leading to marriage. The young couple's happiness was made complete with the birth of their first daughter. Their small family became an ideal model of fulfillment, admired and envied by many. During China's period of reform and development, with their experience and acumen in stock trading, the Zhangs accumulated substantial wealth. In 1997, after building considerable capital in their homeland, the couple discussed and decided to move their daughter abroad. After carefully considering various options, including Canada and Australia, the the family chose to settle in New Zealand. Like many Chinese families, they selected Auckland as the starting point for their new life. With her adaptability and business acumen, she not only integrated into the new lifestyle, but also skillfully built an extensive network of connections. Within just 3 years of settling, she established her own business college. From its first class, the school attracted over 100 students, an impressive achievement for any educational institution. This success wasn't surprising, as Mrs. Zhang was known for her dynamic personality, exceptional talent, and particularly her compelling persuasiveness. Under her skilled management, the school continued to grow, bringing her significant income. However, as fate would have it, business disputes began to emerge, and eventually, the school was forced to close. Undaunted by this setback, Mrs. Zhang quickly sought new opportunities. Her career entered a new chapter when she accepted a senior management position at a major corporation. With her talent and dedication, she achieved considerable success during her 9-year tenure there. Yet, with her ambitious spirit and grand aspirations, Mrs. Zhang once again decided to change her career direction in 2010. This time, she boldly ventured into immigration consulting, a daring but shrewd decision. By frequently traveling between China and New Zealand, she became an effective bridge for Chinese entrepreneurs looking to invest in the land of Kiwis. Her tireless efforts were quickly rewarded with substantial profits, once again proving her exceptional business acumen. In 2013, while attending a seminar, Mrs. Zhang happened to meet Fong Sun, an entrepreneur 8 years her junior. During their social conversations, they surprisingly discovered they were from the same hometown. This connection of shared roots quickly drew them closer, creating a special relationship. At that time, Fong Sun was a successful businessman living in China, intending to relocate his family abroad. After their first meeting, he frequently traveled to New Zealand on business pretexts, seeking opportunities to meet Mrs. Zhang more often. Gradually, the line between friendship and business began to blur, giving way to a deeper relationship. Ironically, their close business partnership meant that neither of their spouses suspected anything about their frequent meetings. To facilitate business cooperation with Mrs. Zhang, in 2014, Fong Sun moved his wife and children to New Zealand. His family stayed at Mrs. Zhang's mansion for an extended period. In late 2014, Fong Sun invested capital with Mrs. Zhang to establish Unwind Company. They subsequently founded 3 more companies in New Zealand and invested approximately $17.5 million in various local businesses. Mrs. Zhang wasn't just skilled in business, she was also adept at social networking. She built close relationships with many senior government officials in New Zealand. She accompanied high-level leaders on business trips to major Chinese cities to attract investment. This close cooperation with the government made Mrs. Zhang's business increasingly prosperous. The Unwind Company she managed sometimes generated profits in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Beyond that, she continued to acquire other businesses, including the film company Digipost, and owned 2 vineyards, Kennedy Point and Carrick. This resounding success turned Mrs. Zhang into a well-known businesswoman and tycoon within the Chinese community in New Zealand. In the eyes of many, Mrs. Zhang was always seen as the ideal model of a successful, talented, dynamic, kind-hearted woman, always ready to help others. However, happiness did not last long for Mrs. Zhang. As if fate were playing a cruel joke, everything she painstakingly built collapsed like a house of cards in less than 2 years. Not only did her flourishing career face serious setbacks, but her family's happiness also teetered on the brink of disaster. In 2019, her marriage to Mr. Fu officially ended. The cause was Mr. Fu's suspicion that his wife's relationship with Fong Sun had crossed the line of mere friendship. After heated arguments, Mr. Fu reported to the police and requested DNA testing on their shared bed to prove Fong Sun's presence. In response, Mrs. Zhang did not stand idly by. She immediately reported to the police regarding Mr. Fu's unlawful trespassing and mental harassment. As the house was owned by Sun Bo, where Mrs. Zhang held the ownership, the police quickly confirmed Mr. Fu's criminal behavior. He ended up facing prison time. After a short stint behind bars, Mr. Fu agreed to the divorce, prompting Mrs. Zhang to withdraw her complaint, a heartbreaking end to a once-admired marriage. In interviews with the media, Mr. Fu continued to assert his belief in an affair between his ex-wife and Fong Sunday. According to him, the divorce was merely a carefully staged performance to allow the two to be together. However, The following developments contradicted public expectations. Not only did they fail to come together, but Mrs. Zhang and Fong Sun's relationship also took an even darker turn. The turning point came in 2019, when Mrs. Zhang made a series of decisions to sell valuable assets and resign from her director roles at 4 of Sun Bo's subsidiaries. Behind these moves was the story of her falling out with co-founder Fong Sun as the company faced continuous losses, forcing the liquidation of precious assets. The most significant loss was Carrick Vineyard, an 85-acre organic estate that she cherished deeply. It was not just any farm, it was a complete complex with a winery, wine cellar, and fine dining restaurant, all of which represented Mrs. Zhang's passion and dedication over the years. Close associates revealed that at that time, Mrs. Zhang was facing enormous financial pressure after a string of business failures. The burden grew heavier as Fong Sun, instead of offering empathy and support, blamed all failures on her poor management. The tension between the two reached its peak in August 2019, when Fong Sun suddenly filed a lawsuit in court. The lawsuit, like a devastating blow, accused Mrs. Zhang caused financial losses of up to $14 million. Moreover, Fong Sun boldly demanded to take over the entire management of Sun Bo, alleging that Mrs. Zhang owed the company $5.9 million. After investigation, New Zealand's court revealed that as of December 2019, Sun Bo was carrying a debt of $9.8 million. Audit results showed that Mrs. Zhang had transferred $2.8 million from the company's account to her personal account. Despite the evidence, Mrs. Zhang denied embezzling company funds. She explained that while she had indeed transferred money to her personal account, she frequently used her own funds to pay company expenses, all in the interest of Sun Bo's growth. She argued that the accountant had only noticed the funds transferred to her account without acknowledging the personal funds she had used for company expenses. Furthermore, Mrs. Zhang claimed that one of Sun Bo's subsidiaries still owed her $7.3 million. A month later, the court ordered the liquidation of all jointly owned companies and the freezing of their largest business project, a different vineyard under early development. This marked the official end of their business partnership. After gathering the above information, the police focused their investigation on 2 individuals, Mr. Fu, her ex-husband, and Fong Sun, her former business partner. Both were closely connected to Mrs. Zhang, involving both personal and financial matters. However, after questioning and investigation, the police determined that relationship between Mrs. Zhang and Mr. Fu had not reached a level where he would harm her. Moreover, Mr. Fu had remarried after the divorce and had a clear alibi. Mr. Fu also shared that despite the divorce, they remained like family due to their shared custody of pets, even co-parenting 2 dogs. 6 months before the tragedy, Mr. Fu had visited Mrs. Zhang's house, where she confided about escalating conflicts with Fong Sun. As a mutual friend, Mr. Fu had once tried to mediate between them. He also disclosed that during a private meeting, Fong Sun had once threatened that if Mrs. Zhang did not repay the borrowed money, he would go after her family, including Mr. Fu. The police then shifted their focus to Fong Sun, who was 8 years younger than Mrs. Zhang. However, when faced with tough questions, Fong Sun offered unexpected explanations. He openly admitted his deep hatred for Mrs. Zhang following significant financial losses. But he argued that killing her would not solve anything and would only make matters worse. His lost money would still not be recovered. Additionally, Fong Sun revealed that Mrs. Zhang had another romantic relationship with a younger man who was also heavily indebted to her. Mrs. Zhang didn't remain single for long after her divorce from Fong Sun. At a Chinese community event, she met Kai Weijing, a young and handsome recent immigrant to New Zealand. The two quickly developed feelings for each other and officially started dating. Within 6 months, sharing a passion for filmmaking, they launched a film company called Passion Picture Group, with an initial investment of $28,000 from Mrs. Zhang. During a trip to China, Mrs. Zhang transferred $14,000, which she inherited from her late father, to Kai's bank account. However, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a freeze in the film industry, leaving their film company in crisis. By March 2020, when New Zealand imposed a nationwide lockdown due to the pandemic, Mrs. Zhang invited Kai to live with her to alleviate the fear of alone. They lived together until a few weeks before the tragedy, when Kai moved out. The relationship between Mrs. Zhang and Fong Sun had completely deteriorated amidst ongoing legal disputes. Their financial situation worsened, and Mrs. Zhang faced mounting losses, pushing her closer to bankruptcy. In this dire situation, Mrs. Zhang's daughter took action to recover the $14,000 her mother had previously lent to Kai. Despite her desperate pleas, Kai made weak excuses, claiming his bank account was locked and he could not transfer the funds. When summoned by the police, Kai explained that he had no reason to harm Mrs. Zhang, citing his stable financial situation and ownership of 3 properties. He stated, "Why would I kill someone over $14,000? He also provided a solid alibi, showing that he had been in Ruatoria on New Zealand's east coast for industrial hemp training during the time of the incident. On November 27th, he returned to Auckland and learned of Mrs. Zhang's disappearance the next day. The police believed Kai's account and ruled him out as a suspect. At this point, all suspicion shifted back to Fong Sunday. Mrs. Wu told the police that Mrs. Zhang had been threatened multiple times before her death. Several neighbors also reported seeing an Asian man frequently driving around Mrs. Zhang's house recently, seemingly monitoring her every move. Further investigation revealed that after the collapse of Suanbua, all their assets were auctioned. Fong Sun was evicted by his wife and moved to a house just a few hundred feet from Mrs. Zhang's mansion. Most of his business funds had been borrowed from friends, leaving him not only financially ruined, but also discredited within the business community. His life spiraled into a vicious cycle. During the day, he scrambled to deal with debts and legal proceedings, while at night, he was tormented by relentless calls from creditors. Overwhelmed from all sides, his mental and physical state deteriorated rapidly. Realizing that Mrs. Zhang was unable to repay the substantial debt, Fong Sun began to plot revenge. Despite his financial woes, he was willing to pay $200 per hour to hire 4 detectives to track Mrs. Zhang's every move. The man hired for the job was Jun Jin, known as Jimmy, a former schoolmate of Fong Sun and a retired police detective from China. After purchasing modern surveillance equipment online, Jimmy cleverly attached it to the undercarriage of Mrs. Zhang's car. Since July 2020, Jimmy had been reporting back to Fong Sunday. Just 2 days before the tragedy, Jimmy discovered Mrs. Zhang driving alone to a casino in Auckland. Curious about this visit, he delved deeper and found that she had visited the casino 381 times in the past 4 years. This revelation not only served as a statistic, but also exposed a dark side to the life of the woman. Mrs. Zhang had become a full-fledged gambling addict. Jimmy immediately relayed this information to Fong Sun, unaware that it could be the final straw that triggered the impending tragedy. On the morning of the murder, Jimmy received a message from Fong Sun instructing him to stay away from Mrs. Zhang's house due to heavy police presence. Jimmy assumed Mrs. Zhang had fled due to her debts. However, he realized the tracking device was still on her car and needed to be removed to avoid police detection. Checking the surveillance cameras, Jimmy saw Fong Sun's car parked nearby, so he drove over, circling around the area discreetly and waiting for a moment when there were no people around to remove the tracking device from the underside of Mrs. Zhang's car. Early the next morning, Jimmy met with Fong Sun at a McDonald's restaurant. Fong Sun reiterated that Mrs. Zhang had been gambling frequently and emphasized that she had won a significant amount of money the day before. What struck Jimmy as odd was that Fong Sun insisted on erasing all the data from the tracking device, but Jimmy refused to comply. This decision later proved to be the right one as news of Mrs. Zhang's tragic death broke later that same day, prompting Jimmy to immediately suspect Fong Sun. The police searched Fong Sun's residence and discovered a detailed diagram of Mrs. Zhang's house marked with specific locations for security cameras. However, there were 12 distinct fingerprints on the document, none of which belonged to Fong Sunday. Investigators continued to examine surveillance footage from around Mrs. Zhang's house and found that at approximately 3:38 a.m. on the day of the incident, a man was seen near her home. At 4:26 a.m., Mrs. Zhang's phone was turned off and its signal was lost entirely. By 7:48 a.m., multiple street cameras captured images of Mrs. Zhang's Range Rover driving away. Based on this information, the police developed a theory. Fong Sun may have secretly entered Mrs. Zhang's home, leading to a heated argument and a violent struggle. He allegedly stabbed Mrs. Zhang multiple times, causing her death. After committing the crime, Fong Sun took her phone, laptop, data storage devices, and security cameras, dumping them in a nearby landfill. At 8:05 a.m., surveillance footage captured the Range Rover returning. 3 minutes later, a figure was seen walking from the direction of the landfill toward Fong Sun's home. Over a year after the tragedy, on April 26, 2021, the highly publicized trial commenced at the Auckland City Court. Mrs. Wu, a close friend of the victim, testified that Mrs. Zhang had reported threats from Fong's son to the police multiple times, explaining why she had called the police that fateful day, when she sensed imminent danger. Mrs. Wu's testimony was corroborated by other friends of Mrs. Zhang, who confirmed that Fong's son had openly threatened to end Mrs. Zhang's life. Despite being confronted with overwhelming evidence, Fong's son stubbornly denied all charges. However, DNA analysis revealed a match between the DNA found under Mrs. Zhang's fingernails and Fong's son's DNA. In response, Fong's son offered a weak explanation, claiming that the DNA transfer could have occurred when his son inadvertently touched Mrs. Zhang's belongings while they were living in her house. This flimsy defense failed to sway the jury. The final verdict was delivered. Fong's son was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after serving 18 years and 6 months. Looking back at Mrs. Zhang's life, it is a tale of highs and lows. From a young, independent woman who climbed her way to success and wealth through sheer talent and effort, she became a successful businesswoman admired by many. Tragically, her life ended unjustly at the hands of her lover. As for Fong's son, it is likely that his resentment toward Mrs. Zhang had festered for a long time, reaching a breaking point when he discovered that she had not only deceived him, but had also gambled away the substantial funds he had painstakingly accumulated over the years. Story 2. Yang Yang was born in 1976 into an unhappy family in Harbin. Her parents frequently argued in front of their daughter, and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Growing up in such an environment gradually shaped Yang Yang's stubborn and obstinate personality. Sometimes even a slight unevenness in her braids when her mother did her hair would upset her until it was redone to her satisfaction. Meanwhile, her parents' daily arguments gradually eroded their feelings for each other, ultimately ending in divorce. From then on, Yang Yang followed her mother to live in Xiamen. Growing up in a single-parent family, Yang Yang became an independent and opinionated young woman. Once she made a decision, she would follow through regardless of others' advice. Perhaps out of concern for her mother's hard work and caring for her, Yang Yang decided to become a boarding student shortly after starting middle school to reduce her mother's burden. After graduating from middle school, she chose a vocational high school. Due to her perfectionist nature, her academic performance was excellent in all aspects, and she even served as the president of the student council. Additionally, she was beautifully attractive, making her a well-known figure at school. The vocational high school Yang Yang attended had a partnership with Xiamen Airlines. In 1993, she applied for an open recruitment for flight attendants. With her outstanding qualities, she outperformed over 2,000 applicants, successfully passing the screening to become one of the 30 selected candidates. She then underwent professional training. By 1997, Yang Yang had passed all exams with flying colors and became a flight attendant for Xiamen Airlines. This glamorous job with its high salary filled Yang Yang with enthusiasm. She worked diligently, serving passengers with care and gentleness, striving to shine in this position. Soon, Yang Yang's outstanding performance caught the attention of her superiors. All these efforts helped her win the title of top 10 flight attendants of the airline at just 21 years old. However, it was at this time that a man appeared who would completely change the course of her life. As a flight attendant, Yang Yang interacted with many passengers daily, but they were all just passing acquaintances in her life. One day, on a flight from Beijing to Xiamen, Yang Yang was doing her routine cabin check. She maintained her usual enthusiastic service, but a young man caught her attention. This man smiled brightly at her, constantly calling for service, asking for coffee one moment and cola the next. When filling out the passenger feedback form, he used the excuse of not understanding how to fill it out to ask Yang Yang for help, seizing the opportunity to ask for her phone number for future inquiries. Although Yang Yang was young, she had been working for a few years and understood the man's intentions. However, as the customer is always right, directly refusing would have been impolite. Seeing his persistent requests, Yang Yang thought for a moment and wrote down her pager number. She figured that since it was just a pager number, not a landline or mobile number, whether to respond would ultimately be up to her. After disembarking, Yang Yang didn't think much of it, but this man frequently paged her, inviting her out for meals. Yang Yang politely returned one call and used the excuse of being too busy to decline his invitation. During this process, she learned that the man's name was Gu Jiming. He normally lived in Beijing and frequently traveled to Xiamen for business. During that time, whenever he came to Xiamen, he would page Yang Yang. Yang Yang thought that since he lived in Beijing and she was in Xiamen, they couldn't become friends, not even casual ones. So apart from that one phone call, no matter how often Gu Jiming paged her, Yang Yang had no further contact with him. Moreover, during this time, Yang Yang truly didn't have time to pay attention to Gu Jiming. She was busy looking for a good school. Yang Yang had been working in the industry for a few years. Although being a flight attendant was a job many people envied, she wasn't satisfied with it. Yang Yang understood that a vocational degree would limit her future development to some extent. Therefore, she hoped to continue her studies to improve herself. Yang Yang was quick to act on her thoughts. Soon after, she decided to pause her developing career as a flight attendant to enroll in the Adult Education College of Peking University, majoring in business administration. Returning to university life, Yang Yang treasured this rare opportunity. She stayed at school to study diligently and got along well with her classmates. Her classmates described her as beautiful, fond of ballet and sports, but not much of a party-goer. She usually dressed simply. She even served as the flag-bearer in Peking University's centennial celebration. However, this peaceful life was disrupted by an unexpected phone call in 1998. It was Yang Yang's second semester at Peking University. That day, she suddenly heard the dormitory manager calling her name. "Yang Yang, you have a phone call." So she went downstairs to answer the phone. A voice that was both strange and familiar came from the other end. After a few seconds of thought, Yang Yang surprisingly remembered the caller's name, Gu Jiming. This moved her a bit. A year had passed since their initial meeting, yet this man was still so persistent and remembered her. After inquiring, she learned that Gu Jiming had been persistently paging her. Before Yang Yang went to Beijing for school, she had left her pager number in Xiamen. Later, Yang Yang's mother saw Gu Jiming's message and called him back. Gu Jiming, after all, was a man who had been in the business world for many years. His politeness, sincerity, and generosity left a very good impression on Yang Yang's mother. So she gave him the phone number of her daughter's dormitory. This phone call greatly changed Yang Yang's attitude towards Gu Jiming. He was no longer just an ordinary person in her eyes, but gradually, she developed a good impression of him. Gu Jiming also seized this opportunity. The next day, he drove his Mercedes to Peking University to find Yang Yang. In a later interview, Yang Yang described this meeting very dreamily. She said that day, when she walked out of Peking University campus, she saw a Mercedes and had a feeling it was Gu Jiming. That day, he was dressed very smartly, had deliberately put on perfume, and exuded the aura of a wealthy man. He held a bouquet of fresh flowers and smiled as walked towards her. Although many articles later described Gu Jiming as a perfect CEO figure, in reality, Yang Yang was 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters tall, while Gu Jiming was only 5 feet 6 inches, 168 centimeters, and 10 years older than her. Nevertheless, in pursuing Yang Yang, Gu Jiming spared no effort. He frequently sent flowers daily and took her out in luxury cars. To get closer to her, he even enrolled in an English class at Peking University. Although he only attended 2 classes in the end, it was enough to make Yang Yang, a girl with little romantic experience, gradually fall into his web of love. After all, a wealthy, sincere, and ambitious man like Gu Jiming was the dream of many young girls. In their daily interactions, although Gu Jiming didn't explicitly express it, he intentionally conveyed the information that he was still single. He told Yang Yang, "Now people my age are all married with children. Look how young I am. I don't look like I'm over 30 at all." From then on, Gu Jiming became Yang Yang's closest friend in Beijing. When she didn't have classes, she often went out with Gu Jiming. When she fell ill, the first person she thought of calling was Gu Jiming, and he would immediately drop everything and take her to the hospital. Later, Gu Jiming even prepared a special pager for Yang Yang. After receiving this pager, Yang Yang always looked forward to Gu Jiming contacting her. But this time, there was no news from him for 3 consecutive days. This caused Yang Yang great distress. It was then that she realized how deeply she had fallen into Gu Jiming's love trap. Gu Jiming, having experienced many relationships, understood women's psychology very well. He had Yang Yang firmly in his grasp. On Yang Yang's birthday, he took her to a 5-star hotel in Beijing. There, he had prepared 9,999 roses. This moved Yang Yang to tears, completely breaking down her defenses, and she threw herself into his arms. From then on, they officially began dating. The next day, Gui Jiming told Yang Yang to come find him at the Roman Garden apartment complex nearby after class. When she arrived, Yang Yang learned that to be closer to her, Gui Jiming had rented an apartment there. That day, many of his colleagues and friends were also present. This was equivalent to Gui Jiming publicly introducing Yang Yang as his girlfriend to everyone. Gui Jiming told her, "The conditions at school aren't good anyway. Why don't you move in here?" Having developed deep feelings for Gui Jiming, Yang Yang didn't hesitate to move into this apartment and begin living with Gui Jiming. The time that followed was the sweetest period in their relationship. However, when her studies at Peking University ended, Yang Yang faced the choice between love and career. She was uncertain whether she should return to being a flight attendant. Due to Gui Jiming's persistence, Yang Yang finally gave up her flight attendant job and decided to stay in Beijing. At the same time, Yang Yang's mother married a Canadian man. She had originally planned to take her daughter abroad, but Yang Yang refused. She rejected opportunities to leave Gui Jiming time and time again, gradually losing herself and sliding into an abyss. As time passed, Yang Yang began to notice some unusual things about Gui Jiming. When he made phone calls at home, he always used a dialect to communicate. Although Yang Yang couldn't understand Minnan dialect, she could still distinguish words like child and business trip in those conversations. Moreover, although Gui Jiming always made calls in front of her, sometimes his eyes would avoid hers. Based on her woman's intuition, Yang Yang sensed that Gui Jiming was hiding something. But even so, Yang Yang didn't directly ask Gui Jiming, but quietly inquired with the housekeeper. This housekeeper was also someone Gui Jiming had invited from his hometown in Guangzhou, so she was quite familiar with his affairs. However, the housekeeper always gave evasive answers or changed the subject, only telling Yang Yang that Gui Jiming was a good person and she should just trust him. Thus, Yang Yang could almost confirm that her suspicions were correct. Gui Jiming must have a wife and children in his hometown. For Yang Yang, Gui Jiming was her first love. She couldn't accept this deception and decided to confront him. When exposed, Gui Jiming appeared very agitated, even crying dramatically. He explained to Yang Yang that he and his wife had been emotionally disconnected for a long time, but because they had a child, he hadn't had the courage to divorce. He also said that before Yang Yang, he had a girlfriend who was a student at the Fashion Institute, but she later fell in love with another man and left him. He promised Yang Yang that he would definitely divorce his wife and marry her, repeatedly emphasizing that all responsibility was his, that he had lied and Yang Yang was not at fault. Although this explanation was quite forced, Yang Yang was still moved by his tears. Not long after, Yang Yang became pregnant. At this time, she was still a student, and it being her first pregnancy, she felt very scared. Moreover, she didn't want to use this to bind Gui Jiming. So, after discussing with Gui Jiming, she terminated the pregnancy. But this incident made her feel very resentful. Although Gui Jiming treated her very well at this time, her role was still not legitimate. So, she set a deadline, requiring Gui Jiming to divorce and properly handle their relationship within 1 or 2 years. During this time, Yang Yang, with her unstable mood, often argued with Gui Jiming for no reason. But he was usually the one to give in. Time passed, and during the Chinese New Year of 1999, they went back to Fujian together for the holiday. Yang Yang demanded that Gui Jiming resolve his family issues during the holiday. He had to choose either to divorce his wife or break up with her. Although Gui Jiming verbally agreed, he seemed very hesitant. On the 29th day of the last lunar month, he came from Guangzhou to Xiamen to find Yang Yang. After meeting, Yang Yang again mentioned that he should go back and be clear with his wife. Clearly, Gui Jiming was still not determined. After all, he and his wife still had a young child. Seeing Gui Jiming's hesitation, when he was driving back to Guangzhou, Yang Yang offered to go with him for part of the way. As a result, when they were about to get on the highway, Gui Jiming saw that Yang Yang had no intention of getting off, thinking she planned to go back to Guangzhou with him to clarify things. This made Gui Jiming a bit angry. In fact, Yang Yang originally had no such intention. But when provoked like this, she really did insist on going back to Guangzhou together and demanded that Gui Jiming call his wife to inform her. Gui Jiming, also angry, actually made the call and told his wife, "My girlfriend wants to come see you." Receiving such a sudden call, his wife didn't believe it at all and thought her husband was joking. But when they arrived in Guangzhou, Yang Yang lost all courage to meet Gui Jiming's wife. After staying in a hotel for one night on New Year's Eve, she took a taxi back to Xiamen by herself. However, before leaving, she reminded Gu Jiming once again. This time, Gu Jiming finally told his wife about the situation. When his parents learned about their son's affair, they were very angry. Therefore, his family had an unhappy New Year. As soon as the New Year was over, Gu Jiming hurriedly took Yang Yang back to Beijing. But unexpectedly, as soon as they arrived, Gu Jiming's parents immediately followed. They used the excuse of coming to Beijing for medical treatment and stayed in Yang Yang and Gu Jiming's apartment. But their real purpose was to examine the woman who had disrupted their son's family. His mother didn't like this woman who had broken up her son's family and didn't agree to her son's divorce. One day, Gu Jiming's Rolex watch suddenly disappeared. His parents thought Yang Yang had taken it, and Gu Jiming also suspected her. Because of this incident, the two were cold to each other for over a month. This incident greatly hurt Yang Yang. In the latter half of 1999, Yang Yang had the idea of studying abroad. This could give her time to calmly think about her difficult situation. Her parents were very supportive, and Gu Jiming didn't object. In April 2000, Yang Yang went to Switzerland to study hotel management. She thought she could calm down, but Gu Jiming's calls could come at any time. There, Yang Yang studied and worked simultaneously, living in the hotel where she was studying. At night, if she turned off her phone, Gu Jiming's calls would come from the first floor to the 6th floor of the hotel, calling room by room until he found her. Just in Yang Yang's first month in Switzerland, Gu Jiming's phone bill exceeded $4,500. Moreover, every holiday, Gu Jiming would call to urge her to come back, saying he missed her very much. Therefore, while Yang Yang's classmates often traveled during holidays, she would fly back to reunite with Gu Jiming. Although most of the time, they felt that absence makes the heart grow fonder, Yang Yang always felt troubled by her illegitimate role. Moreover, she also discovered some of Gu Jiming's personality traits that she couldn't accept. For example, some of his business partners considered affairs like theirs normal. He also frequently went to entertainment venues to entertain clients. Once, Yang Yang hurriedly returned from Switzerland and accidentally caught Gu Jiming being intimate with some hostesses in a karaoke room. She was so angry that she threw her bag at Gu Jiming. Gu Jiming felt this action made him lose face and offended his clients. On the way home, he hit Yang Yang's head with a brick, requiring 3 stitches at the hospital. Later, Gu Jiming told Yang Yang that he had bought a house in Beijing under his wife's name. He explained that he did this because the house was an internal purchase and he had a Hong Kong household registration. Moreover, Gu Jiming's parents had suggested that after Yang Yang returned to Switzerland, they would have his wife bring their child to live in Beijing. Yang Yang understood that this was their attempt to strengthen the marital relationship. She felt that getting Gu Jiming to divorce was completely hopeless. Every time she returned, they were very affectionate, but as soon as she left, he would return to his wife and child. This was something she absolutely couldn't accept. This time, after Gu Jiming dropped her off at the airport, she decided to end everything herself and prevent Gu Jiming's wife from coming to Beijing. She changed her flight to Switzerland to 3 days later and secretly went to Guangzhou. Yang Yang knew that Gu Jiming's wife was applying for a Hong Kong household registration. So she called pretending to be a staff member in charge of the procedure and said a health check was needed first. Then, she brought mercury extracted from 10 thermometers to Gu Jiming's house and made his wife drink part of it. She then took out a pregnancy test strip and made the wife hold it in her mouth. After waiting a few minutes and seeing no reaction, she made the wife drink the remaining mercury. Afterwards, she hurriedly left and returned to Switzerland. After the incident, Gu Jiming's wife felt something was wrong, so she called her husband to tell him what happened. Gu Jiming immediately guessed it was Yang Yang's doing, and told his wife to go to the hospital for a checkup quickly. It was confirmed to be mercury poisoning, but fortunately, because she went to the hospital in time, there were no lasting effects. Although Gu Jiming persuaded his wife not to report to the police, his relationship with Yang Yang became increasingly distant. He began to avoid Yang Yang. Yang Yang also started to feel frustrated about this and planned to study in Canada. In April 2001, Yang Yang returned from Switzerland to apply for a Canadian visa. Although Gu Jiming was avoiding her, they still had contact. Gu Jiming often helped her with the visa process. However, at this time, they were no longer living together. During this period, Yang Yang lived alone in a rented apartment. Around midnight on June 27th, Yang Yang went to Gu Jiming's house. She knew that due to client entertainment, Gu Jiaming usually returned home at midnight. At exactly midnight, Gu Jiaming came home. He saw Yang Yang and asked, "Why are you here?" She replied, "I want to see you, I have something to tell you." But Gu Jiaming coldly said he had work in the morning and told Yang Yang to go home. When Yang Yang refused to leave, Gu Jiaming reluctantly opened the door and let her in. Once inside, Gu Jiaming ignored her and went to the bathroom. Yang Yang heard him seemingly talking on the phone with a girl. She was very angry and told Gu Jiaming that she also had a new boyfriend, along with some words intended to provoke him. In his anger, Gu Jiaming had sex with her. Afterward, looking at the sleeping Gu Jiaming, Yang Yang couldn't sleep. In her mind, like a slow-motion film, memories of their years together played. Then she remembered the phone call Gu Jiaming had just made and took his phone to check. Perhaps the noise woke Gu Jiaming. Seeing this, he became very angry, struggling for the phone while beating and scolding Yang Yang. He then grabbed a knife and lunged forward. In the chaos, Yang Yang tried to grab the knife but accidentally stabbed Gu Jiaming in the stomach. At this point, Yang Yang immediately pulled out the knife and both were stunned. After staring at each other for a few seconds, Gu Jiaming shouted for help and again struggled with Yang Yang for the knife. In the confusion, Yang Yang stabbed him in the neck and chest more than 10 times, until they were both exhausted. Subsequently, Gu Jiaming died. At this point, Yang Yang dragged his body into the bathroom and cleaned up the blood in the room. She put the bloody bedding and curtains in the washing machine to clean. Then, she used garbage bags to pack the knife and blood-stained towels and papers, drove Gu Jiaming's car, and threw these items into a trash can in a nearby residential area. Next, Yang Yang returned to her rented place to get a large suitcase and went back to Gu Jiaming's house. But this suitcase was still not big enough to hold Gu Jiaming's body. So, she had to go out to buy a larger suitcase nearby. However, when she returned again, she heard the housekeeper calling the police. So, she quietly left the scene. Afterward, she went to a nearby hospital to treat the wound on her hand and also changed her place of residence. On October 8th, while applying for a visa at the Canadian Embassy, Yang Yang was discovered and reported. Subsequently, she was arrested by the police. Because Yang Yang had taken Gu Jiaming's mobile phone, watch, and some other property before leaving his house, as well as driving away his Audi, she was charged with murder and theft. On September 9th, 2002, the first trial sentenced Yang Yang to death. However, she felt the sentence was unjust and appealed. On August 8, 2003, after comprehensive consideration, including the fact that Gu Jiaming had intentionally deceived Yang Yang and other circumstances, the judge changed the sentence to a suspended death sentence. Looking back at the years Yang Yang and Gu Jiaming spent together, most of the time was filled with struggle and entanglement. She always thought she was fighting for happiness that should have been hers, but in reality that happiness did not belong to her. The case of Yang Yang and Gu Jiaming is not only a heartbreaking tragedy, but also a story that shows the serious consequences of infidelity and deception in marriage. With all her advantages, Yang Yang could have had a bright future. However, because of a blind love, she lost everything and ended up in prison. As for Gu Jiaming, a selfish and irresponsible man, he paid the price with his own life. Story 3. The incident took place in Sapporo, the capital city of Hokkaido, Japan, with a population exceeding 1.9 million. In the downtown area of Sapporo, there is a famous nightlife district known as Susukino. Along with Kabukicho in Shinjuku and Nakasu in Fukuoka, it is one of Japan's 3 largest red light districts. A man named Hiroshi Yura, who enjoyed dressing up as a woman, was a regular visitor. Unfortunately, the place he loved was also where his life would come to a tragic end. On the southern side of Sapporo's nightlife district stands a love hotel called Let's, which has a total of 7 floors. The exterior features simple concrete walls with striking signs between the 2nd and 3rd floors. During the day, it doesn't draw much attention, but when night falls, the lights turn on, creating a somewhat eerie glow across the neighborhood. Inside, the hotel rooms are fully equipped with amenities such as a TV, refrigerator, and various conveniences. Guests can also enjoy complimentary drinks and breakfast during their stay. The central figure of this case is Hiroshi Yura, 62 years old, who lived with his wife in the suburbs about 18 miles, 30 kilometers from Sapporo. The couple had 2 grown children. Hiroshi Yura worked for a construction materials company, and his colleagues regarded him as an honest, serious, and trustworthy individual. To cope with work-related stress, Hiroshi Yura often drove alone to Sapporo to relax at night clubs. As was his routine on the afternoon of Saturday, July 1st, 2023, Hiroshi Yura was in his hotel room. He secretly took out a box hidden under his bed, filled with cosmetics, and began applying makeup. Hiroshi Yura was an honest and straightforward man, but he had a penchant for makeup and wearing women's clothes. He kept this side of himself well hidden, and no one around him knew, not even his wife of many decades. That afternoon, a club in Sapporo hosted a large disco party. Most of the attendees were middle-aged, ranging from 40 to 60 years old. Hiroshi Yura had been looking forward to this day for a long time. He carefully styled his hair and applied meticulous makeup, then slipped into a shimmering silver mini dress paired with black stockings and leather shoes. Once he was all set, Hiroshi Yura left home and drove to Sapporo for the party. He didn't tell anyone about this, not even his wife, who had no idea where he was going. Hiroshi Yura arrived much earlier than the scheduled time. Dressed in his bold and glamorous outfit, he immediately caught everyone's attention. Usually, Hiroshi frequented various clubs, both large and small, in Susukino. There, he applied heavy makeup and transformed into a completely different persona, ensuring that none of his friends or family would discover his secret. After some time, the music finally started, and the stage lights flickered on, marking the official beginning of the party. Performers took turns on stage, showcasing belly dances and impressive transformations that had the crowd cheering nonstop. The atmosphere quickly heated up. Hiroshi Yura, along with the crowd, danced to the music. Time passed quickly, and before anyone realized it, it was already 10 p.m., signaling the end of the disco party. No one wanted to leave, and people reluctantly said their goodbyes and slowly made their way out. Hiroshi Yura caught up with some old friends, took a few photos, and then left the club as well. He got into his car, but instead of heading home, he drove alone to the nearby Let's Hotel, where he had arranged to meet someone. At around 10:30 p.m., Hiroshi Yura, dressed in women's clothing, stood at an intersection. He was waiting for a woman he had planned to meet. They exchanged a few words, and by 11 p.m., the two entered the Let's Hotel and rented a room. By 3 p.m. the next day, Sapporo police received a distressing call. The caller identified himself as an employee of the Let's Hotel. In a panic, he told the police that there appeared to be a dead woman in room 202 of the hotel. Shortly after, police and emergency responders arrived at the scene. The hotel employee who had reported the incident just minutes earlier was waiting by the door of room 202. He still appeared visibly shaken. Under the guidance of the hotel staff, the police, wearing gloves, carefully entered the room. Upon stepping into the bedroom area, they observed a bed, a sofa, a TV, and other household items. The bedroom was clean, with the bedding neatly in place and no signs of disarray. In the cabinet next to the sofa, the toothbrushes and toilet paper were untouched, as if no one had been staying there. The bathroom was located on one side of the room, with the door left open. Inside, they saw a figure shirtless facing the bathtub, kneeling with their head down toward the tub. As the police moved closer to inspect the scene, they were met with a chilling sight. The person wasn't simply bowing their head. In fact, there was no head at all. The head had been severed and was missing from the scene. Upon further investigation, the police discovered that the victim was not a woman, as the caller had initially reported, but a man. Strangely, there were no traces of blood on the body, just a single fatal wound, and there were no signs of a struggle. The cause of death was determined to be blood loss shock. It appeared that after the victim had died, the perpetrator had decapitated him and meticulously cleaned the scene to erase any evidence. The police continued their search but found no clothes, phone, or ID belonging to the victim, making it impossible to determine his identity at that moment. Room 202 also contained several scattered fingerprints, possibly from previous guests. Oddly, the fingerprints didn't match anyone in the police database. A hotel staff member provided a useful lead to the authorities. Around 11 p.m. the previous night, the victim had checked into the hotel with a woman whom we'll call A. Since this was a love hotel that prioritized customer privacy, the hotel didn't require ID, only check-in procedures. As a result, the staff didn't know the real names of either person. It was known that one of the two individuals, likely the older woman, had short hair and was wearing a silver jacket and a short skirt. The other individual, referred to as A, appeared much younger, possibly in their 20s or 30s, with a petite frame. They were about 4 inches shorter than the victim, standing around 4 feet 11 inches to 5 feet 3 inches tall, and wore a white shirt, shorts, and a short skirt. During check-in, A was wearing a black hat and a mask, completely concealing their face. Only a glimpse of blonde hair could be seen beneath the hat. They were also pushing a large black suitcase. In the suburban area where the Let's Hotel operates, the nightlife scene is fairly complex. Even when two women check into a love hotel, it isn't unusual. The hotel staff didn't find this odd. However, both guests seemed unfamiliar with the place, as if it were their first visit. 3 hours later, A left the hotel alone. The staff noticed that A was still wearing the black hat and mask, but their clothing had changed. Upon leaving, A was dressed in a long black coat, black pants, and knee-high black boots. A was still pushing the large suitcase, and it appeared that something bulky was hidden under the coat, as their backs seemed unnaturally protruded. As time passed and morning arrived, more guests checked out and left the hotel, but the remaining guest in room 202 had not yet departed. By 3 p.m., there were still no sounds or movements from the room. The hotel staff, sensing something was wrong, went upstairs to check. When the door was opened, the room was eerily silent. After scanning the room, the hotel employee noticed someone kneeling in the bathroom. Terrified, he couldn't move any closer, shouting toward the person, but receiving no response. Too scared to approach for a closer look, the staff member immediately called the police. The entire time, the employee believed the individual was a woman, and this belief may have spared him from witnessing a horrific scene that could have haunted him for life. From conversations between the police and medical personnel, it became clear that the victim was, in fact, a man, and he was headless. It was obvious that the woman who had stayed with the victim was a prime suspect in a serious crime. Through the investigation, the police discovered that the victim had been dressed in a distinctive style and had frequented the Susukino district. This led them to suspect that the two might have been a same-sex couple. Additionally, there was a possibility that it could have been a man dressed as a woman. The police began investigating information about A. By around 2 a.m., they had reviewed all surveillance systems around the hotel, which showed A leaving the hotel and turning right, heading south toward the first intersection. She stopped briefly before reaching the hotel's parking lot. It was unclear if she was avoiding surveillance cameras or looking for someone, but it quickly turned back toward the hotel and then continued west, disappearing from the surveillance system. At this point, her trail was temporarily lost. A day later, on the night of July 3rd, the Chiyoda police station in Hokkaido received a phone call reporting a missing person. The caller was a woman, stating that her husband, Hiroshi Yura, had disappeared 2 days earlier after leaving their home in the afternoon. After a thorough investigation, the police determined that Hiroshi Yura had gone to Sapporo on the day of his disappearance to attend a disco party. His car was later found in a parking lot near the club. The discovery of a headless man had already caused a stir, and the Let's Hotel was not far from the club that hosted the party. As a result, police began suspecting that the two cases might be related. According to Hiroshi Yura's wife, her husband had undergone an appendectomy, and the headless man in the hotel also had a surgical scar on his abdomen. The police went to Hiroshi Yura's home to collect his fingerprints. After comparing them to the prints found on the headless man in the hotel, the police confirmed that the victim was indeed 62-year-old Hiroshi Yura. Once the victim's identity was confirmed, the police investigation uncovered a few more leads. They immediately began looking into Hiroshi Yura's social connections. To his coworkers and neighbors, he was seen as a serious and honest man. He was generally quiet and didn't seem like someone who would have enemies. The police investigated several shops in Susukino. At first, people there were unfamiliar with the name Hiroshi Yura, but after seeing his photo, they immediately recognized him as a person who often wore heavy makeup. At one bar, the police found a woman who could provide some information. She revealed that the entrance fee at the Bani Club was different for men and women. Because of this, some men, including Hiroshi Yura, would dress up as women to take advantage of the discounted price. This wasn't unusual at that bar. Hiroshi Yura always appeared dressed as a woman. Perhaps because of this, many people mistook him for a woman. The informant had met Hiroshi Yura over a year ago. When she first saw him, she had also mistaken his gender because of his skillfully applied makeup and feminine attire. Although Hiroshi Yura dressed like a woman, he wasn't attracted to men. He often tried to flirt with young women, sometimes even getting a bit too physical. This wasn't uncommon in that environment, where there were plenty of attractive young women at the bars. Hiroshi Yura would often approach them under the pretense of bonding like women and would flirt with them. After getting acquainted, Hiroshi Yura would immediately proposition these women. If they rejected him or called him out, he would act indifferent, pretending not to care. He never seemed to feel embarrassed about his behavior. There were also rumors that Hiroshi Yura had tricked a woman into going to a hotel with him to assault her. For various reasons, the woman didn't report it to the police. As the story spread through the local community, 2 clubs put Hiroshi Yura on a watch list. Some female patrons expressed disgust and dislike toward him, warning each other in groups to be cautious of Hiroshi Yura. Returning to the case, the police now needed to answer the question, was Hiroshi Yura's death connected to Suspect A? The police repeatedly reviewed the footage of the streets and stores near the hotel, trying to find clues. Upon closer investigation, based on details like walking posture and clothing, they concluded that A had a small, slender frame and was somewhat short, strongly indicating that she was likely a woman. But what raised suspicion was the fact that carrying out a beheading requires not only specialized skill, but also a steady mindset. Hiroshi Yura was, after all, an adult man. If he had been killed in just one blow without any sign of resistance, it would be very unusual. Furthermore, after the attack, A was able to calmly clean the scene, change clothes, and leave with confidence. They believed that it would be very difficult for such a petite woman to carry out this act on her own. It was highly likely that someone else was involved in the crime. However, the hotel staff insisted that only 2 people had initially entered the room, which made the case even more puzzling. The police didn't want to miss any potential evidence, so they continued to investigate the surveillance around the hotel. They requested that taxi drivers passing by the area on the day of the crime provide their driving records. After considerable effort, the police finally found a suspicious vehicle about 656 feet from the hotel. On the morning of July 2nd, about 15 minutes after it left the hotel, she was picked up by this car, which then left the scene. The discovery of this new evidence excited the investigators. They identified the owner of the suspicious car as Dr. Osamu Tamura, a 59-year-old resident of Atsubetsu, Sapporo. Dr. Osamu was the head of the psychiatry department at the Central Hospital of the Medical Union. He was known to get along well with everyone and was a highly skilled doctor. However, neighbors had noticed that his behavior had been unusual recently. They reported seeing him standing at his door eating noodles or boxed meals, and sometimes he would sit in his car to have lunch instead of eating inside his house. Since the incident at the Let's Hotel, Dr. Osamu had been frequenting internet cafes and seemed to spend very little time at home. His wife, Hiroko, was a year older than him and a housewife. The police's attention quickly shifted to their 29-year-old daughter, Runa Tamura. Both her age and appearance closely matched Suspect A. As the only child, Runa was very much loved and spoiled by her parents. However, for some reason, Runa hadn't worked for many years and remained at home. One neighbor even mentioned, "I haven't seen Runa in the past 2 years." At this point, the police didn't rush to act, but instead conducted further investigations into Dr. Osamu Tamura's family. From what they learned, Dr. Osamu had graduated with honors from Asahikawa Medical University. He had once aspired to become a surgeon, but during his first surgery, Osamu experienced dizziness and couldn't continue. On the advice of the faculty, he switched to psychiatry and later became a psychiatrist. In reality, Osamu was quite skilled in surgery. From this detail, the police speculated that the beheading, which required a certain level of expertise, could have been something Osamu was capable of executing. The police then investigated Osamu's credit card records and checked nearby shopping centers. This led to an important discovery. On the morning of July 1st, Osamu had purchased a knife, a saw, a suitcase, earrings, and a blonde wig from a retail center. This raised the likelihood of his involvement in the crime. The police immediately requested a search warrant. Once granted, they proceeded to Dr. Osamu Tamura's house to conduct the investigation. The Tamura home was a 3-story white building. Before entering, the exterior appeared tidy, with neatly arranged potted plants on the balcony. However, stepping inside revealed a stark contrast. The interior was filled with cardboard boxes and trash, completely disorganized, and there was a strong, foul odor, as if the place hadn't been cleaned in a long time. Upon searching the house, the police found Runa Tamura. They also discovered the suitcase and the black clothes worn on the day of the murder. Other items, such as the blonde wig and saw, were gradually uncovered, nearly completing the evidence against Runa. The police then proceeded to the second floor via the stairs. The air grew increasingly foul, causing the officers to grimace. The closer they got to the bathroom, the stronger the smell became. When they pushed open the bathroom door, they saw a round object from a distance. Upon closer inspection, they confirmed it was a human head. It was resting there in the bathroom, already decomposed to the point where facial features were no longer distinguishable. After comparing dental records and DNA, the police confirmed that the head belonged to the victim found at the Let's Hotel, Hiroshi Yura. On July 24, 3 weeks after the incident, the police located and arrested Dr. Osamu Tamura in an internet cafe in the Atsubetsu area. The next day his wife, Hiroko Tamura, was also arrested. Faced with the police investigation, Runa Tamura clearly admitted to the crime. However, her testimony only made the situation more confusing. Runa claimed that she suffers from dissociative identity disorder. She explained that one of her alternate personalities had killed Hiroshi Yura, and that personality had nothing to do with the version of Runa now under investigation. Runa described herself as typically quiet, calm, and not fond of talking. Her other personality, however, was aggressive and hot-tempered. Because of this, she struggled to fit in at school like her peers. While in elementary school, a mischievous classmate teased her, and to everyone's shock, the normally silent Runa suddenly lashed out, grabbing a knife and attacking the other student, leaving them terrified. By the time she reached middle school, her condition had worsened, and she eventually decided to drop out. This led to Runa never holding a job afterward. Runa was introverted, disliked men, and rarely left her house. She had virtually no social connections. Her parents always tried their best to care for and pamper their daughter. Dr. Osamu Tamura was a music lover. In his youth, he had been a guitarist in a band. Even after starting his career, he never gave up his hobby. He created a YouTube channel called Runninette, where he uploaded guitar-playing videos. His wife, Hiroko, had a passion for gardening and painting. She would often paint and give Runa illustrated stories that she liked. For New Year's this year, Hiroko painted a bright and warm watercolor for the family. If it hadn't been for their daughter's illness, they would have been a happy, fulfilled family. Despite everything, the Tamuras loved their daughter unconditionally, and Runa deeply loved her parents in return. Although she harbored a strong dislike for men, she was friendly and affectionate toward her parents and older adults. So what could have led this loving, tight-knit family to commit such a horrifying crime? The police gleaned some insight from Runa Tamura's grandfather. He said, "I haven't seen the Tamura family in 3 years. We only occasionally kept in touch by phone. Just over a month ago, I heard that Runa had been assaulted, but the issue had been resolved. However, it seems that incident caused some complications, leading to the tragic outcome we see today." At this time, Runa Tamura's motive for the murder has not been disclosed by the police. However, based on current clues, the online community has speculated the following. 2 months ago, 29-year-old Runa Tamura was struggling with self-control issues. Under the supervision of her father, she attempted to join a club in the town of Susukino and participate in some activities with its lively crowd. It was during this time that Runa became acquainted with Hiroshi Yura, a man who often dressed as a woman. Hiroshi was experienced in seducing women. Outwardly, he appeared to be a mature and wise woman. Given Runa's limited interactions with men, her guard was lowered. Gradually, Hiroshi got closer to Runa. Surveillance footage from the club shows Hiroshi and Runa standing near each other, engaging in intimate behavior, while Runa's father, Osamu, watched them from afar. As a psychiatrist, it's unclear what Osamu might have been thinking at that moment. One day, Hiroshi used sweet words to lure Runa into a hotel, where he assaulted her. It was then that Runa realized Hiroshi was actually a man, but by that time it was too late. During the assault, Hiroshi may have recorded a video and used it to blackmail Runa. Afterward, Runa felt humiliated and angry and told her parents about the incident. Upon learning what had happened to his daughter, Osamu was enraged and couldn't contain his anger. Perhaps to protect his daughter from further harm, Dr. Osamu chose not to go to the police but privately confronted Hiroshi, warning him to stay away from Runa. Hiroshi promised Osamu that he would never approach their family again. However, Hiroshi didn't keep his word. He still had the incriminating video of Runa and harassed her up to 7 more times, threatening to expose her unless she met with him. Hiroshi even threatened to come to her house. The Tamura family, wanting to preserve their reputation, didn't want to make Runa's assault public. They were trapped, unsure of what to do. As tensions grew and dissatisfaction mounted, Osamu began taking measures. He laid a white cloth in front of their house, seemingly as a warning. He also started eating outside his home or in his car, secretly monitoring to see if anyone approached their home. Whenever Hiroshi lingered near, Osamu would immediately appear and chase him off. As the situation seemed to improve, Osamu decided to resolve the issue once and for all. It wasn't long before Hiroshi invited Runa to meet again. A detailed plan was set in motion for Runa to carry out. Knowing that his daughter had a mental illness, Osamu believed that even if she were caught, her sentence would be reduced. With this in mind, they crafted a meticulous plan. Early in the morning on July 1st, just as dawn was breaking, Osamu and his daughter went to a nearby large store to buy some tools. That evening, the two went near the hotel. Runa, wearing a wig, a hat, and a mask, went alone to meet Hiroshi at the arranged location. 3 hours later, she cleaned the crime scene, changed into a different outfit that concealed her face, and left the hotel. She then got into her father's car, and they drove away. Runa wore gloves throughout the entire crime, leaving no fingerprints at the scene. However, Osamu hadn't yet figured out how to dispose of the head, so he temporarily left it in the bathroom at their home. He intended to wait until the rumors died down before dealing with it. The family believed they could return to living a normal life, but trouble kept coming. On the afternoon of the second day, the hotel staff reported the incident. The case quickly made headlines, causing a nationwide sensation. The immense public pressure led the police to deploy a large task force, with everyone working hard to investigate the case. Within just a few days, the victim was identified as Hiroshi Yura. Since the crime, Osamu's wife and daughter had rarely left the house for fear of being caught. Only Osamu continued going to work as usual. Meanwhile, trash piled up inside the house, and the foul odor from the bathroom spread to the bedroom, to the point where Osamu eventually couldn't bear to enter the house anymore. During the police investigation, Osamu's wife began to feel that it was only a matter of time before they were caught, so she called Runa's grandfather to share her worries. Despite her concerns, she ultimately decided to stand by her husband and daughter. The family continued living in an increasingly strange way in their home until the case was solved. As for why they specifically had to decapitate Hiroshi Yura, online rumors continued to circulate. The most common theory was that it was done to conceal the victim's identity and by time to delay the police investigation, allowing them to escape. There was also speculation that the act might have been related to the sensitive video. The theory was that removing Hiroshi's head would allow his face to be used to unlock his phone through facial recognition, giving them access to delete the videos and eliminate the evidence permanently. Some speculate that when the crime took place, Runa entered the hotel carrying a large suitcase, and inside that suitcase was Osamu. Once inside, Runa took advantage of the situation and handcuffed Hiroshi, allowing Osamu to emerge from the suitcase and commit the crime. As someone with surgical knowledge, Osamu could have carried out the gruesome act in a short amount of time. Additionally, as a psychiatrist, he had the mental fortitude to handle such a situation. Thus, the theory that Osamu was the killer makes the story seem more plausible. After the crime, the father and daughter cleaned the scene together. Osamu then hid back in the suitcase while Runa carried the victim's head in her backpack, wore a long coat to conceal her identity, and left the scene. However, there are some doubts about this theory. For example, although the suitcase was large, the saw wasn't small either. Could the suitcase have fit both Osamu and the tools? Another point of skepticism is the rumor that Osamu had to switch from surgery to psychiatry due to dizziness. So the question remains, did he really commit the crime? To this day, the police have not officially disclosed the details of the case or the motive behind it. Initially, people believed that Hiroshi Yura was just a regular person who enjoyed eccentric clothing, which garnered sympathy from the online community. But as more details of the case emerged, the narrative shifted. Runa began to be seen as the victim, and the criticism directed at her diminished significantly. Some online users are even calling for leniency in her sentencing. As of now, the trial has not yet taken place. There are rumors that the police are awaiting final verification from Runa's mother. It's unclear whether she was involved in the crime and if so, in what capacity. If new evidence emerges, the situation may shift again. No matter what happens, the Tamura family can never return to what they once were. Story 1. We found a plain SD card that she said, when she played it in her phone, looked like it was a phone video of a murderer. And she wants to get it to you guys. This call was placed on September 30th, 2019. What started as a simple case of stolen property quickly spiraled into one of the most horrifying murder discoveries in Alaska's history. A woman, unknowingly snatching an SD card from a man, found herself staring into pure evil, graphic footage of a brutal killing. But the real nightmare? The victim was someone she knew. She said she was going to the liquor store, she was going to get a bottle, and she had to go meet up with somebody. That must have been him, because that was the last time I ever saw her. Brian Stephen Smith lived a life of deception. To his wife, he was a devoted husband. To his colleagues at Marriott Hotel, a generous man with a passion for vlogging. To his mistress, a dark and twisted enigma. But to his victims, he was a self-proclaimed serial killer, one who inflicted unimaginable horror before stealing their last breath. And it was all hidden in that one tiny SD card. That tiny piece of evidence would finally rip the mask off the monster. But even with him behind bars, a chilling question remains. Could there be more victims we don't know about? I do not remember this. On these audio, on the videos, on several of them. In my movies, sadly, everybody dies. What are my followers going to think of you? People need to know when they're being serial killed. These are things you're saying to her while you're doing that. Why would I say that? Can you even just say things like that? By all accounts, Smith was the kind of guy who looked like your everyday American neighbor. The type no one would ever suspect of anything sinister. And everyone vouched for his normalcy. Even his wife stood by his innocence, refusing to believe he was capable of such horror, even after he was sentenced. But one night, as Smith cruised the streets looking for company, he picked up a woman, seemingly offering her a ride and a warm place to stay. While he stepped into a store, she sat alone in his car, her curiosity leading her to pick up a cell phone he had left behind. What she found inside would shake her to the core. A folder titled Homicide at Marriott Hotel Midtown. Inside that folder was a collection of horrifying photos and videos, gruesome evidence of a woman's desperate cries for help. The footage showed her gasping for air as a man mercilessly filmed himself violating her, stomping on her throat while her body lay battered and broken. What the F*** K? My father would think about you if I could not take care of you. Okay, there you go. The SD card contained 39 images and 12 videos, all documenting the same horrifying incident. We have legally obtained these files from law enforcement, and there is no denying that they are brutally graphic. The footage revealed extreme violence and a brutal sexual assault against a woman inside what appeared to be a hotel room. The man behind the camera never showed his face, but his voice was clear. He strangled the woman as she fought back, scratching at him, trying to break free. At one point, he complained that his hand was getting tired. Instead of stopping, he began stomping on her neck, pressing down with his full weight. K. Are you still alive? Yes. It's been like, 20 minutes? So, I think it's time we finish. At one point, the woman was already lifeless when the man took a cord and strangled her again, leaving anyone who saw the clip haunted for days. However, the images that followed were even more disturbing. They showed the woman's lifeless body on the floor, naked, battered, and brutalized. The man had even taken close-up photos of her genitals and her severely beaten face, as if documenting his crime with no remorse. The timestamps on the files revealed they were recorded on September 4th, 2019, less than a month before the SD card was discovered. For a city like Anchorage, this was beyond disturbing. Despite being Alaska's largest city, it has a population of just under 300,000, a place where people know their neighbors, where violent crimes of this magnitude are rare. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. As mentioned earlier, the man never showed his face, but authorities recognized his voice. For reasons unknown, Brian Smith was already on their radar, and the moment investigators heard the voice from the recordings, they knew it was him. And that voice sounded just like this. Anyway, it's an actual beaver there. I don't know if this GoPro can pick it up, but there's a little beaver house over there. Very pretty out there. It actually looks prehistoric. Prehistoric with a capital P. What really stood out about this case was that at first, police believed there was only one victim. But during Brian Smith's interrogation, just as the officers were about to wrap up and leave, Smith said something chilling, something that suggested there was more than one. Are you guys in a rush to go home? Are we in a rush? Do you want to talk some more? We're not in a rush. We got all night. I picked up a very drunk girl. My wife was gone. She was away for the week, and I had to go home. And I shot her. That same day, authorities identified the first victim as 30-year-old Kathleen Jo Henry. Born on December 22, 1988, not much was widely known about Kathleen, but she had been active on social media right up until 5 days before those horrifying videos were recorded in the hotel room. She was originally from Eek, Alaska, a remote village with fewer than 500 residents, made up mostly of native Alaskans. The place was so isolated that you couldn't even drive there from Anchorage. It was over 400 miles away, across rugged mountains and harsh terrain. Kathleen had left that small world behind and moved to Anchorage. She had been divorced and described herself online as a tough Alaska chick since 1997. In 2012, while incarcerated, she earned her GED. Her record stretched back to 2007, including multiple counts of assault, disorderly conduct, drunk driving, resisting arrest, and theft. Her most recent charge was on January 12, 2019, a fourth-degree assault, which in Alaska could mean anything from causing bodily harm to throwing bodily fluids on law enforcement or other protected individuals. Despite her past, Kathleen seemed determined to turn things around. She had spoken about feeling hopeful for the future. She had people who cared about her. She was loved, and it was also known that she had a passion for writing poetry. But how she crossed paths with Brian Smith remains a mystery. 2 days after the discovery of the card, police responded to a call about human remains in the southern part of the city, which they believed belonged to the woman in the video. At the time, Brian Smith was not even in Alaska. He was vacationing in Virginia with his wife. You could even see their videos on YouTube, where they truly looked like a happy couple. When Smith finally returned to Anchorage, stepping off his flight at Ted Stevens International Airport, he had no idea what was waiting for him. Authorities were already there. He had come back to start a new job at the Residence Inn, another hotel under the Marriott brand. Though he was already working at a Marriott location near University Lake, this new position was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, the second his feet touched the ground, police moved in. He was arrested on the spot and charged with murder. But here's the real question. Who is Brian Stephen Smith? And how did his wife never suspect a thing? Brian Stephen Smith was born in Queenstown, Eastern Cape, South Africa. His past remains largely a mystery, except for a trail of eerie Facebook posts and an unsettling online presence. He attended Queen's College High School and once ran a guest house in South Africa, with dreams of one day owning his own hotel. But something led him to leave his home country behind and start fresh in Alaska. There's been endless speculation about why he made the move. Some believe his dark impulses didn't begin in Alaska, that he may have been engaging in disturbing activities long before setting foot in the U.S. What we do know for certain is that his life took a sharp turn when he met his future wife, Stephanie, through online gaming. Stephanie was nearly 20 years older than Smith, but that didn't stop them from falling hard and fast. Just 7 months after meeting, they tied the knot in 2014, and Smith relocated to Alaska that same year. Stephanie had a passion for music, but worked as an administrative officer for U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Services, a position that conveniently handled immigration paperwork. Looking back, Stephanie claimed she never suspected a thing. This happy, doting husband is the man Stephanie Bisland said she married. The man accused of murdering vulnerable women, someone she doesn't recognize. I've never seen anything that dark in him. For the record, Brian Stephen Smith had no known criminal record in Alaska. However, details about his past in South Africa were scarce, aside from the fact that he had served in the military. After moving to the United States, Smith worked various jobs over the years, including positions at Alaska Tire Service, Dell Engineers, and the Marriott at University Lake. He appeared to be an ordinary man blending into his new life. Then, in September of 2019, just weeks before the chilling SD card was discovered, he officially became a U.S. citizen. At the time of his arrest, Smith lived in a quiet Anchorage neighborhood called Geneva Woods, sharing a home with his wife and their cat. On the surface, they seemed like an average couple, but Smith's online activity painted a different picture. He had an active YouTube channel where he posted travel vlogs and random videos documenting his life in Alaska. What he didn't realize was that his obsessive need to film everything would later play a crucial role in his downfall. Beyond YouTube, Smith frequently used Quora, a platform where users ask and answer questions, and it was here that another disturbing side of him emerged. He was a blatant racist. His posts revealed a deep-rooted hatred, particularly toward race relations in South Africa and Africa as a whole. His rants were filled with toxic extremist views that left little doubt about his prejudices. On the other hand, Brian Stephen Smith's wife, Stephanie, insisted once again that she never noticed anything strange about her husband. To her, he was just a hard-working man with a steady job and a quiet life in Anchorage, Alaska. But as we all know, killers can be masters of deception. Behind closed doors, Smith was living a double life. He had a mistress, someone much younger than his wife. Her name was Alicia Youngblood, and she wasn't just any affair. She was a woman who shared his darkest desires. According to Smith himself, their connection was built on twisted fantasies. They didn't just love each other. They fed off each other's hunger for sadistic pleasure. Alicia would send Smith chilling messages, describing violent fantasies of assaulting and even killing someone. And instead of being horrified, Smith was turned on. In Smith's interview, he claimed that it was actually his mistress who first confessed to having dark secrets, secrets that supposedly involved killing someone. However, this turned out to be nothing more than a story. But that story, according to Smith, became his motivation to commit his own crimes. Many people, however, weren't convinced. They believed Smith had violent urges long before he ever set foot in Alaska. After all, he once described the state as the perfect place to carry out heinous acts, boasting that it was easy to commit crimes and dispose of bodies without a trace. Even more disturbing, Smith had a clear preference for targeting native Alaskan women, making his crimes even more chilling. Now, as for Alicia Youngblood, text messages revealed that Brian Smith had actually confided in her about the killings, long before the SD card was even discovered. In one message, Youngblood asked, "Did you ever find your deleted videos? Just a teeny tiny clip would be the ultimate baby. I promise I would erase it. In fact, you wouldn't even have to send a video. Audio would be great." To which Smith replied, but then, he couldn't help himself. He started describing what he had done. He talked about kicking and slapping the woman's private area. At one point, he even admitted that he felt better believing she had survived, when in fact she had died. But Youngblood's chilling response? "I would have loved to seen that." To which Smith replied, this isn't the first time Smith talked about his violent urges, especially when it came to sex. In multiple messages, he sent Youngblood videos of his rough and aggressive desires, seemingly testing how far she was willing to go. But Youngblood wasn't the only one he trusted with his dark secrets. Smith also confided in a friend named Ian Calhoun. During the trial, prosecutors presented text messages showing that Smith had told Calhoun about his crimes. In one exchange, he even hinted at wanting to show him Kathleen Henry's body before dumping it along the Seward Highway. This is from Smith's phone. "I have something to show you, period. Something I can't keep for too long." The lead detective in the Brian Smith murder case read text messages prosecutors say are from the accused killer. "Need to find a secluded spot to meet." The man he texts with pleaded his Fifth Amendment rights and did not have to testify. But messages prosecutors say are between them was presented to the jury. And he responds, "I was not up, comma. Sounds like you were having a lot of fun." "I did have fun. Wanted to share." Yet despite this damning evidence, Calhoun was never charged with a crime. As for Youngblood, she eventually cooperated with the police, exposing everything she knew about Smith. But the most disturbing part? CCTV footage from a drive-thru showed her and Smith casually ordering food, while Kathleen's body lay inside the very same truck. And just when the world was waiting for more answers, Alicia Youngblood was gone. In the year 2021, she took her own life, leaving behind more questions than closure. And the horror didn't stop there. As it turned out, Kathleen wasn't Smith's only victim. If Youngblood had lived, she might have uncovered even more chilling details about the man she once called a lover. Because on the day Smith was arrested, he casually confessed to yet another murder. When authorities searched Smith's home, they seized multiple electronic devices, hard drives, SD cards, USBs. And among them, they found something horrifying. A video of a woman lying motionless on a couch. That woman was Veronica Abachuk. Veronica had been missing for months. When news of her disappearance first spread, her daughter, Christy Grimaldi, posted a heartbreaking plea on Facebook. "I don't think anyone should have to go through this, just hoping she is alive and well." Tragically, Veronica's remains had actually been discovered months before Smith's arrest, in April of 2019. But with only a skeleton left and a bullet fragment lodged in her skull, no one knew who she was. It wasn't until Smith's confession that her identity and the gruesome truth came to light. Smith later admitted that he had picked Veronica up from the streets, offering her a warm bed for the night while his wife was out of town. He even let her shower, claiming she smelled. But after that, his monstrous nature took over. Just like Kathleen, Veronica was brutally murdered. Except this time, Smith shot her before dumping her body in the woods. Veronica's tragic past made her story even more heartbreaking. According to reports, her daughter Christy Grimaldi revealed that Veronica never had the chance to raise her and her siblings. She had endured a troubled life, one that Christy believed stemmed from childhood trauma. She shared that her mother had been molested by a Catholic priest in St. Michael, a trauma that shaped her life forever. After becoming a mother herself, Grimaldi had tried to reconnect with Veronica. She even invited her to live with her, discovering that they shared a simple but comforting favorite snack, rice with melted cheese. But no matter how many times Veronica tried to rebuild her life, the streets always pulled her back. And that's how she crossed paths with Valerie Kassler, the woman who would later uncover the key to this entire case. Because Valerie found the one piece of evidence that sealed Smith's fate, the SD card. And how did she find it? Well, Brian Smith had a dark habit, one that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Every night he prowled the streets, searching for vulnerable women, sex workers, runaways, those society overlooked. One night, Brian Smith picked up Valerie Kassler from the streets, and they spent the next 12 hours together. According to Valerie, nothing about him seemed off. He didn't hurt her, threaten her, or even say anything unusual. To her, he was just another client. But everything changed when Smith stopped at an ATM to withdraw money for their date. While waiting in his car, Valerie's curiosity got the best of her. She picked up 2 phones he had left behind, wondering if they shared any mutual contacts or if she'd recognize any pictures. But what she found was far worse than she could have ever imagined. She stumbled upon the horrifying video, the brutal murder of Kathleen Henry. The moment she realized what she was watching, panic set in. Without hesitation, she grabbed the phone and ran. For days, she hid deep in the woods, terrified that Smith would come after her. She had seen what he was capable of, and now he likely knew she had his phone. But despite her fear, Valerie found the courage to do what no one else had. She turned the evidence in. And with that, Brian Smith's reign of terror was finally brought to an end. But justice didn't come easy. It would take 4 long years after Brian Smith's arrest before his trial even began. And despite the fact that he had already confessed before, Smith suddenly changed his tune, claiming he was pressured into admitting to the crimes after being interrogated for 8 hours straight. But the evidence against him was undeniable. On top of that, the trial was brutal. Jurors had to watch the horrifying videos Smith had recorded, footage so disturbing that the judge debated whether to show them in open court. Smith's lawyer fought hard to get the recordings thrown out, but the court wasn't having it. The case was live-streamed, and the whole country watched as the chilling details of his crimes were laid bare. I'm F*************************** ing half an hour at least now. We're going on half an hour now. Come on please man. Jesus F***********. F*********. Hey honey, hey, that's it. That's it. Just do it. Just take it. Then in February of 2024, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all 14 charges. Smith was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the brutal killings of Kathleen Jo Henry and Veronica Abachuk. But that wasn't all. He was also found guilty of second-degree sexual assault, tampering with evidence, and even mistreating their bodies after death. The jury made it clear that what he did to Kathleen was beyond cruel. She had been tortured, and for that, Smith was handed an automatic 99-year sentence. Veronica's murder added another 30 to 99 years on top of that. His final sentencing was set for July of 2024. When that day finally arrived, the courtroom was packed. Family members of the victims, supporters, and advocates gathered, many of them wearing red to honor Indigenous women who had gone missing or been murdered. Veronica's daughter stood before the court and made it clear. She wanted Smith to spend the rest of his days in prison with no hope of freedom. And the judge agreed. In one interview, even her niece expressed hope for a better outcome in the trial. The Abachuk sisters grieved too much to hold back as Smith entered the courtroom. For the family, knowing what happened is a small step forward, but healing a journey with many unanswered questions, like why this has happened to their family member. Family members told KTU Abachuk liked her lifestyle of homelessness, of freedom, but they worried. It was scary. We've always wanted the best for her. Her niece Tatak Muma remembers her auntie Veronica teaching her how to cook and the kindness she had. Very sweet lady. She loved her kids. She loved everyone. I really miss that. When she went missing 2 years ago, they worried, but never did they imagine it would end like this. We didn't know what to think. We were hoping a better outcome. With that, Smith was sentenced to 226 years behind bars. No chance of parole. No chance of ever walking free again. But the case didn't just bring justice to the victims' families. It shed light on something much bigger. The terrifying reality that Indigenous women in Alaska face every day. Advocates spoke out, demanding change, urging authorities to do more to protect these communities. Because for too long, women like Kathleen and Veronica had been disappearing, and nobody was paying attention. But even after Brian Smith was sentenced, another mystery still lingered. The fate of Cassandra Boskovsky. She was last heard from in the summer of 2019, and then one day she simply vanished. Cassandra wasn't just some missing person case. She was a mother of 7, someone who kept in close contact with family and friends. Her sudden silence was alarming. Then, in September of 2019, Cassandra was officially reported missing. But the truth wouldn't begin to surface until detectives got their hands on Smith's phone later that year. Buried in the files were chilling images. Photos of a woman lying on the ground, either unconscious or dead. The woman in the pictures bore a striking resemblance to Cassandra. Her family had no doubt it was her. Yet, despite the gruesome evidence, the police never officially identified her as a victim. Even Smith himself admitted he had been with the woman in the pictures, but insisted he left her alive. It wasn't until 5 years later, in September of 2024, that a jury finally declared her legally dead. Her family fought tirelessly to prove that she was one of Smith's victims, pointing to small but unmistakable details. A butterfly tattoo, the size of her feet. Clear signs that the woman in the photos was Cassandra. At the Anchorage Police Department, we have not been able to 100% identify the female in the photos as Cassandra. That is what the lead detective in the Smith case told jurors. Her family disagrees. Yes, they do highly. And what makes you think that? Because her photos were taken off of his phone, and he admitted to taking the photos. Grateful for a jury's decision in a hopeless situation. When the jury reached its verdict, emotions ran high. There was relief, but there was also deep sorrow. Cassandra's loved ones wanted more than just a legal declaration. They wanted justice. They wanted Smith to be held accountable for her death, just as he had been for the others. But as of now, Brian Smith has not been charged or convicted in connection with Cassandra Boskovsky's death. Her case remains a painful reminder of how many Indigenous women are taken, how many families are left searching for answers, and how long justice can take, if it comes at all. Story 2. In this quiet, old-fashioned town of Rockdale Township, Pennsylvania, where the Amish embrace a life of simplicity, a nightmare unfolded that no one could have ever imagined. The Amish are known for their peaceful way of life, where violence is rare and murder is practically unheard of. But then came Edward Gingrich, a man who would shatter that history in the most brutal and disturbing way possible. He didn't just kill someone. He carved out his victims' organs and stacked them in a grotesque display, leaving behind a crime scene so horrifying that even seasoned investigators were shaken. And it made Edward the first recorded Amish murderer in over 200 years. Of all the cases we've uncovered, this is one that will stick with you for days, making you wonder, if Edward had been taken to a modern doctor sooner, could this tragedy have been prevented? You can let me know your thoughts once you hear the full story, because trust me, this is as tragic as the mind of the man who committed it. For starters, Edward was one of 11 children, born into a deeply traditional Amish family. When he was 18 years old, his family packed up and moved to Crawford County, Pennsylvania, in 1983. Life in an Amish community is all about simplicity, faith, and following strict rules. But from a young age, Edward never quite fit the mold. While most Amish boys grew up learning farming and carpentry, Edward had an unusual fascination with machinery, something that wasn't exactly encouraged in his world. He worked at his family's sawmill, where he quickly developed a reputation as a master mechanic. He had a special talent for fixing diesel engines, something rare for someone in his community. In fact, people often said, but his curiosity didn't stop with machines. He also had an interest in the outside world, something that made him stand out even more. Unlike most Amish men, Edward started spending time with non-Amish locals, forming friendships that others in his community wouldn't dare to. One of his closest friends was Dave Lindsay, an outsider with whom he felt comfortable enough to admit something shocking. He didn't really like the Amish way of life. This was a huge deal. The Amish are taught from birth that their way of life is sacred, that the outside world is filled with temptation and sin. For Edward to openly say he didn't want to be a part of it, that was unheard of. But then Katie Shetler entered the picture. Katie was the daughter of a highly respected Amish elder, and from the start, their relationship raised eyebrows. People whispered that Katie was too good for Edward, that his rebellious nature would cause trouble. But despite the rumors, family pressure pushed Edward to propose. The Amish believe in strong, traditional marriages, and backing out wasn't really an option. So, on a rainy day in 1986, Edward asked Katie to marry him. By the spring of 1987, they were officially husband and wife. At first, it seemed like Edward was settling into married life, just like everyone expected. Katie became pregnant soon after, and before long, she gave birth to their first child, a son named Danny, after Edward's father. From the outside, it looked like Edward was on the right path, married, working, raising a family. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Edward started to pull away from his community. He became distant, withdrawn, spending more and more time alone. It wasn't just that he missed his old friendships or his interest in machinery. This was different. The once outgoing, talkative Edward was now a man who barely spoke. He avoided gatherings, lost interest in his work, and started acting in ways that confused and worried those around him. Naturally, concern for Edward grew among his family and the Amish community. But in typical Amish fashion, they chose to support him the best way they knew how, staying close, offering quiet encouragement, and hoping for the best. What no one could have predicted, though, was that Edward's detachment was just the beginning. Because by July of 1988, Edward's condition took a disturbing turn. Dizzy spells became frequent, and he was sleeping an abnormal amount, sometimes for entire days. His worried wife, Katie, reached out for help. But in their Amish way of life, modern medicine was a last resort. Instead, they turned to a trusted chiropractor, a man favored by the Amish for his natural drug-free remedies, his solution, toe pulling, foot rubs, and a jar of molasses, the latter meant to purify his blood. The cost? $25. Now let's be real, none of that was going to work. But Edward, desperate and with no other options, went through with it anyway. Despite multiple visits to the chiropractor and more molasses than anyone should ever have to consume, his condition didn't improve. But just when it seemed like everything was falling apart, a flicker of hope appeared. In 1989, Katie gave birth to their second son, and by 1990, they welcomed a daughter. For a moment, it seemed like life might settle down. But Edward? He was already too far gone. His presence in the family became almost non-existent. He avoided his wife and children, showing little to no interest in them. It wasn't just emotional distance. He became physically absent, too, even refusing to sleep with Katie for fear she would become pregnant again. And when he did speak, it was only to mutter strange things under his breath. Things about darkness, about visions, about something coming. By the time 1991 rolled around, Edward was barely a shadow of the man he used to be. His physical health had taken a drastic hit. His once strong and capable hands now trembled with an eerie frailty. His skin had turned pale, almost translucent, and the hollowness in his eyes made it seem like he was peering into a world that no one else could see. Then, as if fate hadn't already dealt him a cruel enough hand, things got even worse. While working in his machine shop, he was exposed to toxic solvents, which only pushed his already fragile body further toward the edge. But here's the thing. The most terrifying changes weren't happening to his body. They were happening to his mind. At first, the signs were subtle, almost easy to brush off. He would mumble to himself under his breath, his words barely decipherable, just a low, constant whisper that unnerved anyone who happened to overhear. But then the whispers grew, became more urgent, more frantic. He started answering questions no one had asked, responding to voices no one else could hear. Then came the laughter, soft at first, then suddenly erupting into maniacal fits that would shake his entire body. His family would find him staring into the distance, lips moving but making no sound, his expression one of pure, unfiltered terror. But the worst was yet to come. One night, without warning, Edward dropped to all fours and began racing around the living room like a wild animal. He howled, an inhuman, guttural sound that sent chills down the spines of everyone in the house. His eyes darted around wildly, as if he were seeing things that weren't there. And then, in a voice that wasn't quite his own, he started raving about giant rabbits with glowing eyes lurking in the dark corners of the house. He swore they were watching him, waiting for him. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, his ramblings took on an even darker tone. He began shouting, screaming really about a war between God and Satan, a battle being waged for his very soul. His family could only watch in horror, unable to do anything but pray that whatever was happening to him would pass. But it didn't. It got worse. By 1992, Edward had descended into full-blown madness. His episodes became unpredictable, violent, and completely unhinged that he could no longer be left alone with his wife and children. At this point, they knew he needed medical intervention. But getting him to a hospital was no easy task. Edward resisted with everything he had, refusing to go willingly. His strength, fueled by some unseen force, was so overwhelming that his family was left with only one option. They had to hogtie him just to get him into the car. When they arrived at the emergency room, chaos erupted. The moment they freed him, Edward snapped. He lunged at nurses, sent medical equipment flying, and thrashed so violently that it took multiple people to hold him down. The medical staff had no choice but to sedate him, finally bringing his madness to a temporary halt. Doctors diagnosed him with a severe psychotic disorder and prescribed antipsychotic medication to calm his symptoms. And for a time it worked. The terrifying visions faded, the violent episodes ceased. But Edward hated the way the drugs made him feel. He described it as being trapped in a slow, foggy world, his body sluggish and his thoughts weighed down. He felt like a zombie, stripped of whatever was left of his identity. And so, like so many before him, Edward made a fateful decision. He stopped taking the medication. Edward's descent into madness reached terrifying depths in the early months of 1993. His mental health had deteriorated so drastically that his wife, Katie, was desperate for any kind of help. In March, she took him to see a well-respected Amish healer named Jacob Troyer, hoping for some kind of remedy. But Troyer took one look at Edward and knew that whatever was afflicting him was beyond any herbal cure or spiritual healing. His words were blunt and chilling. "Your husband has a mental problem. Take him to a hospital. I'm afraid of suicide. Goodbye, and good luck." But whether it was fear, denial, or simply the way the Amish avoided outsiders, Katie didn't take him to a hospital. Instead, the next morning, Edward was taken to a chiropractor. The chiropractor massaged Edward's scalp, gave him some liver pills, and sent him on his way. A man whose mind was on the verge of complete collapse was given a head rub and some pills meant for digestion. Edward was drowning, and everyone around him was pretending he could just float back to the surface on his own. Now, as mentioned earlier, Edward didn't have many non-Amish friends, but one of the few he did have was a man named David Lindsay. David was a born-again Christian, deeply passionate about his faith and determined to save lost souls. When he met Edward at the sawmill, he saw him as someone who needed to be rescued. David wasn't just trying to be a friend, he was trying to convert Edward. He told him that unless he left the Amish faith and became a born-again Christian, he would go to hell. Other evangelists who visited the woodshop repeated the same warnings, pushing Edward to believe that he was trapped, that his wife, his family, and his entire Amish way of life were keeping him prisoner. Edward's mind was already fragile, but these words sent him spiraling further. His paranoia grew. The thoughts that had once been mere whispers in his mind became deafening screams. And soon he began to see his own wife as something far worse than just an obstacle. To Edward, Katie was no longer just the woman who stood in his way. She was the devil. So, on the morning of May 18th, 1993, something inside Edward finally snapped. He had been drowning in depression for months, his mind slipping further into darkness. But that day it was different. Something evil had taken hold. The weight of his torment became unbearable, and as he stood in the kitchen, watching his wife, Katie, go about her mourning, a violent storm erupted within him. Without warning, he struck. His fist slammed into her face with brutal force, sending her crashing to the ground. "I am the devil," he screamed. Katie knew she had to act fast. She turned to her 6-year-old son, Danny, saying, "Run. Get Uncle Dan." Now, Danny didn't hesitate. He bolted out the door, his little feet pounding against the ground as he raced to his uncle's house. When he got there, breathless and wide-eyed, he could barely form the words, saying, "Daddy isn't well." Dan had seen his brother in dark moments before, but this time, something in his nephew's voice sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just another one of Edward's breakdowns. This was something much worse. He ran toward the house, hoping, praying he wasn't too late. But the moment he stepped inside, those prayers were shattered. The scene before him was straight out of a nightmare. Edward was on top of Katie, his fists hammering into her face over and over again. The sound of flesh meeting bone was sickening, and with every brutal hit, blood sprayed across the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. It was pure, unrelenting violence. Bones cracked beneath Edward's relentless assault, their sharp snaps echoing through the house like the breaking of twigs. Later, when paramedics arrived, they would say Katie's face was so utterly destroyed that she was unrecognizable. Dan wanted to stop it. He wanted to do something. But the brother he knew was gone. What stood before him was a monster, lost in pure, uncontrollable rage. Before he could react, Edward stood up, lifted his boot, and with terrifying force stomped down on Katie's face. The crack that followed was sickening, the sound of bones turning to dust beneath his weight. Dan's stomach twisted. His mind screamed at him to intervene, but fear won. He turned and ran, bolting for help. But if you were Dan at that moment, what would you have done? Would you have stepped in, or would fear have paralyzed you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because the horror was far from over. Edward stood there for a moment, then with chilling calmness, he walked to the corner of the room, slipped on his heavy work boots, and returned to his wife's shattered body. And then he stomped again, and again, and again. Each blow crushed what little remained of her skull until her head was no longer a head, just a mess of blood, bone, and flesh. But even that wasn't enough. Something snapped inside Edward. Moving with eerie precision, he stripped Katie's body of its clothes, then walked to the kitchen. His blood-soaked hands reached for a steak knife, fingers curling around the handle, as if it were just another tool in his collection. Without hesitation, he plunged the blade into her abdomen and dragged it downward, cutting through skin, muscle, and tissue. Blood poured onto the floor, thick and dark, pooling around his feet. But Edward didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. His hands disappeared inside her, and then, in a moment so horrifying it defied all human logic, he began pulling her apart. One by one he removed her organs, her heart, her lungs, her liver, her kidneys, her spleen, her intestines. Each one, dripping with blood, was carefully placed in a neat, methodical pile beside her body. It was surgical, calculated, like he was completing a task rather than committing an atrocity. When it was over, he stood up, wiped his hands on his shirt, and walked to the sink. He turned on the water, letting the deep red stains swirl down the drain, as if washing away all evidence of his monstrous act. Then, as if it were just another day, he picked up his Bible, walked over to the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. After that, Edward turned to his 4-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter, their small faces frozen in fear. In a disturbingly calm voice, he told them to put on their coats, saying they were going to their grandfather's house. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added that he would come back to burn the house down. But fate had other plans. He never got the chance. The ambulance crew had already been warned that the scene was unsafe. The call described a disturbed man, with whispers that Edward was inside, killing his wife. Assistant Fire Chief Andrew McLaughlin immediately recognized the name. He had been to the household about a year earlier, and had seen Edward in one of his terrifying episodes, howling like a wild animal, cackling, spitting, and lashing out as his family and paramedics struggled to restrain him. McLaughlin had been in the ambulance with Edward that day, and remembered the chilling words he had whispered. "My heart is loose. I'm drowning on the inside." This time, the emergency team braced for another violent outburst, but when they found Edward walking calmly down the road with his 2 children, he was eerily quiet. He simply told them that his father would understand. However, when McLaughlin finally arrived at the Gingrich home, nothing could have prepared him for the nightmare inside. Katie's naked body lay sprawled on the floor, her skull shattered beyond recognition. Her internal organs were carefully arranged beside her, a grotesque and chilling sight. McLaughlin, horrified, immediately radioed his crew, ordering them to call the police and keep a close eye on Edward. The brutality of the scene was so overwhelming that one of the EMTs ran outside and vomited. When the police arrived, Edward was promptly arrested. He was read his rights, but he didn't resist. Instead, he freely admitted to killing his wife, as if it was a simple fact. At the station, officers ordered him to remove his boots and coat for evidence. As he did, a piece of flesh fell from his boot, a sickening reminder of what he had done. Even in custody, lost in his delusions, he muttered to the officers, "For some reason, I think we could still save her." It was only after his arrest that doctors finally diagnosed Edward with paranoid schizophrenia. A name was finally given to the illness that had tormented him for so long. But the diagnosis had come far too late to save Katie, too late to undo the horror he had unleashed. Neither the prosecution nor the defense ever disputed that Edward Gingrich had killed his wife. The evidence was clear, the crime undeniable. However, the argument was never about whether he did it, it was about why he did it. His attorney, Donald Lewis, painted a harrowing picture of a man trapped in the grips of severe mental illness, unable to comprehend reality, let alone his own actions. Edward pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, a claim backed by chilling accounts of his deteriorating mental state. Edward had begged for help again and again to his father, to his wife, to his brothers. He spoke of the unbearable headaches that tormented him, of his growing fear that God had abandoned him, and of the dark presence he believed had taken hold of him. He was desperate, spiraling, but no one understood the true depth of his suffering. No one realized the horror that was coming. His wife Katie had lived in quiet submission, as was expected in their Amish community. She was a devoted mother and wife, but her husband was becoming more erratic by the day. Even as Edward's mind crumbled under the weight of his delusions, the Amish way of life rejected modern medicine. Instead of psychiatric care, he was treated by a chiropractor who, for 6 months, massaged his scalp and gave him molasses. Hours before Katie's death, that same chiropractor had treated Edward again, completely unaware of the monster brewing beneath his troubled surface. Then it happened. Edward's psychosis reached its breaking point in the most horrific way imaginable. When the fog lifted, Katie was dead. The brutality of the murder shocked even the most hardened individuals. But was it the act of a cold-blooded killer, or was it the tragic consequence of untreated mental illness? In the year 1994, Edward was convicted of involuntary manslaughter but mentally ill. He was sentenced to 5 years in the prison ward of a mental hospital. The Amish community and the public at large were outraged. Many believed this sentence was far too lenient for such a horrific crime. Mental health professionals and even members of his own community feared what would happen once Edward was released. Yet, there were others who took a different view. Some of Edward's fellow Amish saw his punishment as just, arguing that modern medicine had restored his sanity. They believed he was truly remorseful, that he deserved the opportunity to repent, and that with proper guidance he could return to the community. Some even offered to take him in, pledging to supervise him. Against public outcry, Edward was released in the year 1998. He was placed in an Amish mental care facility in Michigan, but after an unspecified incident, he was transferred to an Indiana psychiatric unit designated for Amish individuals who required constant supervision. Still, he longed to return home. He wanted to see his children. He wanted to rebuild his life. Eventually, Edward moved back to Crawford County, but the life he had once known was gone. Though 2 of his brothers and his teenage sons had reconciled with him, the rest of the Amish community had not. Edward was shunned, cast out, forced to exist on the fringes of his former life. In the Amish world, shunning isn't just rejection, it's erasure. To be shunned means you are seen but not acknowledged. You are there, yet you do not exist. His teenage daughter, Mary, was placed in the care of her grandparents and was forbidden from seeing him. Anyone who dared associate with Edward risked being shunned themselves. Even his children, innocent as they were not spared. Tensions ran so high that when some of the children attempted to attend a youth prayer meeting, they were arrested for defiant trespass. In April of the year 2007, Edward's desperation reached new heights. He and his sons orchestrated the kidnapping of his 17-year-old daughter, Mary, in a last-ditch attempt to reclaim a piece of the family he had lost. According to an affidavit from Mary's aunt, Clara Gingrich, Mary and Clara had been traveling in a horse-drawn buggy when Edward's brother, Dan, suddenly leapt onto the wagon, seized the reins, and redirected them toward another Gingrich brothers' property. As they neared the barn, Mary's brother grabbed the horses, leading them inside, where Edward and his other brothers were waiting. Surrounded and outnumbered, Mary was given an ultimatum: leave willingly with her father, or the police would force her to go with him. Convinced she had no choice, she went. For 5 days, Mary was missing. To many in the Amish community, the nightmare was repeating itself. A vulnerable young woman was in the hands of the same man who had murdered her mother. Some feared that Edward had suffered another psychotic break, that history would repeat itself in blood. When Mary was finally found, safe but shaken, Edward faced legal consequences once again. However, his punishment was shockingly light. He pleaded no contest to concealing the whereabouts of a child and was sentenced to just 6 months of probation and a $500 fine. Despite regaining contact with some of his family, Edward remained an outcast. He could never fully return to his old life. For an Amish man, exile was a punishment far worse than prison. It was social death. Edward struggled with his guilt for years. He was haunted by the reality that his family could never fully embrace him without risking their own place in the community. His depression deepened, and he became more isolated. His mental state, once stabilized, began to decline once more. Then in the year 2011, nearly 2 decades after the murder of Katie Gingrich, Edward took his own life. He had been living with his attorney for 6 months. One day, the attorney's wife went out to the barn and found Edward's lifeless body hanging. He had left behind only one final message, scrawled in the dust on top of a bucket. "Forgive me, please." In a twist of irony, Edward was finally welcomed back into the Amish community after his death. He was buried beside Katie in an Amish cemetery, a gesture of reconciliation that sparked just as much controversy as his life had. Some saw it as an act of mercy, a way to finally grant him peace. Others saw it as an insult to Katie's memory. Despite their differing views, the Amish community gathered from far and wide to attend the funeral. They stood together in grief, offering support to Edward's brothers and sons. Now that he was gone, his family was no longer outcasts. They could return. They could belong again. And so, the tragic chapter of Edward Gingrich finally came to a close. As you probably already know, the Amish are known for their simple way of life, rejecting modern conveniences and relying on their faith to guide them. But in Edward's case, their rejection of modern medicine may have sealed his fate, and that of his wife. Had he received proper psychiatric care instead of natural remedies, Katie might still be alive. Story 3. This desperate cry for help came from Rachel Hendricks, a woman who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rachel was one of 3 close friends who gathered at Amanda Colley's upscale home in a quiet suburban neighborhood on what seemed like an ordinary Thursday morning in August 2015. They were there to comfort Amanda as she struggled through the painful collapse of her marriage, but none of them had any idea that, within hours, their lives would be shattered forever. 911, hello? Ma'am? Ma'am? What's your address? Ma'am? Hello? 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 Did you hear what she said, Esso? No, I didn't. She was screaming bloody murder. Is that gunfire? Oh my God! In this sudden burst of chaos and gunfire, their lives were stolen, leaving behind grieving families and 5 young children who would never see their mothers again. A once tranquil community was thrown into shock and heartbreak. But what could have caused such a horrific attack? What led to this moment of terror? This is the tragic story of Amanda Colley, a woman for whom the help of the courts came far too late. That she is the reason this happened. She didn't give him the fortitude he needed. She didn't tell the truth. She wouldn't confirm what he already knew was true. It's her fault. Amanda had been living in her family home in Mirabella, a beautiful and upscale neighborhood in St. Augustine, Florida. She and her husband, James Colley Jr., had chosen it as the perfect place to raise their children. If you took a walk through their neighborhood, you'd immediately get the sense that the Colley family was living a good life. To anyone on the outside, they seemed like the perfect, happy, and successful family. Neighbors often saw James laughing and playing with their 2 children, 6-year-old Trey and 4-year-old Avery, in the cul-de-sac. The couple was known for hosting lively gatherings, inviting friends over for drinks and celebrations. Even as their marriage started to unravel, Amanda and James appeared to handle it with quiet grace. Whatever struggles they faced stayed hidden behind closed doors. That's why the events of August 27, 2015, were so shocking. Around 9 o'clock that morning, Rachel Hendricks received a message that something was wrong with Amanda. She and Amanda had been friends for years, having met at a mutual friend's party. Along with Lindy Dobbins, the 3 women had formed an unbreakable bond. They babysat each other's children, supported one another in times of distress, and were always just a phone call away. So when Amanda needed them, Rachel and Lindy didn't hesitate. That morning, Rachel had just dropped her kids off at school. Before heading to Amanda's house, she made a quick stop at a friend's home to get her hair done. It was supposed to be a normal day, but for Amanda, the chaos had already begun. Her usually pristine Morabella home had been completely trashed overnight while she was away. When she returned at 9 o'clock that morning, she walked into a nightmare. Drawers had been pulled out, clothes and papers were scattered everywhere, Personal belongings had been tossed aside, and even her TV had been smashed to pieces. Strangely, nothing had been stolen. Everything had simply been torn apart, as if someone had been searching for something. Maybe at that moment, Amanda realized just how much danger she was in. Maybe that's why she called her friends over, believing that safety came in numbers. But as that morning would soon prove, no number of people could have protected her from what was coming. Inside the house that morning were 4 people: Amanda, Lindy, Rachel, and Lamar Duberly. Lamar was Amanda's boyfriend. She had been officially separated from her husband James since June, but she had met Lamar months earlier in April. Their connection started as a professional relationship, but slowly evolved into something more personal. By June 2015, after her separation, Amanda and Lamar had begun seeing each other. Can you describe how that relationship started, if it progressed, and how it progressed? The relationship started professionally, and it progressed into a personal relationship. And then we began seeing each other in June 2015. And ultimately, that was an intimate relationship, correct? Correct. Now, Lamar wasn't just any man. He was a force to be reckoned with. A former military officer with an impressive resume, he had attended the U.S. Naval Academy, studied at the Marine Corps University, and even worked at the Pentagon. Sharp, disciplined, and strategic, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen and handled high-stakes situations. Amanda met him while they were both working in corporate management at Fanatics, a sportswear company. As her marriage with James crumbled, she found solace in Lamar, a man who offered stability when everything else in her life was spiraling. And on that fateful Thursday morning, when she returned home to find her house torn apart, Lamar was one of the first people she called. After she got to the house, "Did you hear from her?" "I did." "How did you hear from her? Call or text?" "Amanda FaceTimed me, and I was able to survey the damage with her." Lamar, Lindy, and Rachel arrived, each of them hoping to provide Amanda with comfort and a sense of security. Together, they walked through the wreckage, drawers overturned, belongings scattered, a silent warning that something was terribly wrong. While Amanda and Lindy stayed upstairs, trying to make sense of it all, Lamar took Rachel to the garage to assess the damage. "Did there come a time that you were notified that something was going on in Amanda's house?" "Yes." "And who notified you of that?" "Lindy." "Now, imagine coming home to find your house completely ransacked, drawers pulled out, belongings scattered, every inch of your safe space violated. That alone is terrifying. But before you even have a chance to process the mess, gunshots ring out. Suddenly, a trashed home doesn't seem so bad. Amanda barely had time to react before the chaos escalated. Outside, a man stood in her backyard, gripping a handgun and aiming it directly at the living room. Shattered glass sprayed in all directions as bullets tore through the windows. His furious voice echoed through the air, saying, "Where is he?" Over and over again. That man was James Colley, Amanda's estranged husband. And he wasn't just there to scare them. He was out for blood. Inside, Rachel and Lamar froze for a split second. Then reality hit. James wasn't just shooting into the house at random. He was looking for someone, and Lamar didn't need to guess who. With Amanda in the middle of a messy legal battle, her home torn apart, and her new relationship no longer a secret, Lamar knew immediately that he was the target. Without hesitation, Lamar yelled for everyone to run. Then he bolted. He ducked under the garage door and sprinted between 2 houses in the cul-de-sac, his pulse racing as he put as much distance as possible between himself and the enraged gunman. Now, if you were in Lamar's shoes at that moment, what would you do? Would you leave Amanda behind, or would you make the same choice he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Meanwhile, Amanda and Lindy, caught further inside the house, had no way out. They did the only thing they could. They ran upstairs. Rachel followed, her instincts screaming at her to find shelter. Amanda locked herself in the bathroom, while Lindy and Rachel dove into the master bedroom closet, barricading the door. Rachel braced herself, her foot pressed against the bottom of the door, her left hand gripping the doorknob with all her strength. Lindy crouched behind a chest of drawers, silent, barely breathing. At this point, James stormed through the front door while his gun was still drawn. He stomped up the stairs, rage fueling every step. He wanted Lamar, but Lamar was gone. Instead, he found Amanda. From inside the closet, Rachel and Lindy could hear him screaming. "I believe Mr. Colley came over and tried to get into the closet door, and Amanda said, 'He's not in there, that's Rachel and Lindy in there.' 'That's Rachel and Lindy.' And Lindy said, 'It's Lindy in here.' I never said anything, but she shouted out and said, 'It's Lindy.' At that time, I heard a shot while Amanda and Mr. Colley were arguing, and that was all I heard of Amanda. But if you think James's rage ended with Amanda, think again. His bloodlust wasn't satisfied. After gunning down his wife, he turned his attention to the master closet, where Rachel and Lindy were hiding. As mentioned earlier, Rachel was using her arm to brace the door while Lindy frantically relayed their desperate situation to the 911 operator. James, growing more impatient by the second, pounded on the door and shouted, "Open the door, open it now." When they didn't comply, he fired. The bullet tore through the door, grazed Rachel's arm, and the searing pain forced her to stumble backward. That moment of weakness was all James needed. He kicked the door open, his eyes wild with rage. But Rachel got lucky. James wasn't looking for her. His target was Lindy. Without hesitation, he stormed past Rachel, giving her the split-second chance she needed. Heart pounding, she turned and ran, fleeing into the neighborhood, desperately searching for help. Meanwhile, Lamar, who had escaped earlier, had also found someone who called 911. But by the time law enforcement arrived, it was too late. James had vanished, leaving behind a house soaked in blood and horror. The once safe home was now a crime scene, a place of unthinkable violence and devastating loss. Information about a deadly rampage in a St. Johns County neighborhood. Investigators say James Colley shot and killed his wife and her best friend. Boss. Lindy had been shot 3 times. Amanda 9. James had shot her once before forcing his way into the closet where Lindy and Rachel were hiding. Then, after killing Lindy, he unleashed 8 more bullets into Amanda's body. He had started with a 9mm handgun, emptying it into Lindy, and when that was out of bullets, he pulled out his .45, a backup weapon, proof that he had come prepared for something far worse than just an argument. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was pure, calculated rage. But why? Not much is known about the early days of James and Amanda's relationship. Amanda was 36 years old in the year 2015, a year older than James. She was born in Orlando, Florida, and had built a successful life for herself. Professionally, she thrived, and socially, she was surrounded by people who adored her. James, on the surface, appeared just as put together. He worked in the mortgage industry and lived what seemed to be a stable life alongside his wife and children. To those looking in from the outside, he was a devoted father. A man who spent every waking moment with his kids, teaching them how to swim, always present, always involved. His sister Crystal spoke of him with admiration, painting a picture of a loving, family-oriented man. But behind the carefully crafted image of a devoted father and hard-working professional, James harbored a darkness that had been with him for years, a past stained with violence and unresolved trauma. According to his sister, James had grown up witnessing terrifying moments of rage within his own home. He had seen his mother, seething with fury over his father's infidelity, sitting on the stairs with a baseball bat in hand, waiting. The second his father walked through the door, she swung, again and again, her anger manifesting in brutal blows. But the violence didn't end there. Another argument, another eruption of rage. This time she reached for a knife, her temper spiraling out of control. And James stood there, a helpless child, watching it all unfold. He saw what unchecked anger looked like, what it could do, how it could consume a person. Did these moments shape him? Did they plant the seeds of his own uncontrollable fury? A defense lawyer would certainly argue that they did, that James was merely a product of his environment, repeating the cycle he had been exposed to. But trauma alone doesn't excuse what happened that night. By late August of 2015, James and Amanda had been separated for months. He had moved on, or at least that's what everyone thought. James was seeing someone new, yet his obsession with Amanda hadn't faded. Instead, it had festered, growing into something dangerous, something deadly. Amanda had done nothing wrong. She had simply wanted to break free from their toxic marriage, to rebuild a life of her own. But James refused to let her go. His attack wasn't just a crime of passion or a fleeting moment of lost control. It was premeditated. It was the culmination of his growing rage, his need for dominance over the woman who dared to walk away. And in the end, Amanda paid the ultimate price, for nothing more than wanting to be free. Now all of this toxicity comes to a peak when a neighbor sent James a photo, Lamar, shirtless, mowing Amanda's lawn. That was all it took to set him off. Fury consumed him, igniting a relentless storm of abusive text messages and voicemails that wouldn't stop until the day of the murders. In their conversation, he texted her, "Oh, and your boyfriend has been parking at the playground and walking around the back. The whole neighborhood knows. You should